Ray Zero Arc 6, Chapter 33 Part 1/2. I said a while ago that I intend to translate TAPPEI-sama's latest chapters once he resumes writing the WN again. It hadn't been possible before, when he resumed in February, due to my life schedules. But with this mind-blowing chapter released today, I can't wait on it any longer. My primary goal is still to translate Arc 4, and I will only translate the new chapters when they come out, using extra time I have. But this is very, very exciting. It will be possible to participate in the latest theories in real time. Left behind by a myriad of fluttering feathers, Abyss descended on the balcony in the night. Fearless birds spread their wings and took to flight into the murky night sky. One could almost say that falling from that lonely sky would have been easier than remaining in this place. If only that were true, Subaru would have wholeheartedly embraced that notion at least. Aside from this suffocating situation, that would have been the next worst thing. The location was the watchtower, on a balcony hidden by the night. Julius stood there, blocking the doorway, with doubt carved into his handsome features and rigid cheeks. In front of his line of sight were Subaru and Echidona, who had been secretly conversing in the night to Julius. She would have been Anastasia, since they looked exactly alike. Julius, what you said just now, what did you mean? In that tense, congealing space, Julius repeated this over and over. The bewildered content of his words was no different from the moment before, but his voice sounded weaker with every repetition, like proof of the depth of his sorrow. When did you start listening to the conversation? Faced with Julius' question, Subaru forced his halted thoughts to move and landed on this question. When did he start listening? That's the most important thing. The content of that conversation with Echidona equals Anastasia just now was definitely not something he should have been allowed to hear before he had been prepared. For in this watched-her expedition, the secrets kept by Subaru and Echidona were simply far too deep. Things ranging from artificial spirits, witch of greed, authority of gluttony, and their various implications. Subaru had hidden them all from Julius, having judged that they would only complicate things and bring him nothing but suffering. More than anything was the fact that Anastasia's spirit was sleeping, and that right now, the one inhabiting her body was the artificial spirit of Echidona. In other words, Anastasia. Tilda, come on, Natsuki-kun, stop looking like that, Subaru. Ha! Suddenly, lightly poking the stiff Subaru in the chest with her finger, Echidona put on a charming smile. Her tone and attitude were so perfectly like Anastasia's that for a moment Subaru bulged his eyes in stupefaction and could not be entirely certain what was happening. Leaving Subaru behind, as if dancing, Echidona did a turn on the spot, and Anastasia, I'm sorry, Julius, but it's not like we're leaving you out of the loop, you know. I just thought I'd talk with Natsuki-kun about some of the important things that'll be happening after we leave the Pleiades watchtower. That's all, Anastasia. We had to leave the green room since Rem and the baby ground dragon were there, you know. It's not like we're afraid of any special secret leaking out, but I was just in the mood for something extra secretive. So we moved around, and this just happened to be the only suitable place we could find. That's all. Clapping her hands together in front of her chest, Echidona slightly tilted her head as if to say, forgive me. That adorable gesture appeared to be just the kind of thing Anastasia would think of. But unlike the one trying to distract away from the vital part of the story, Anastasia would never sink as low as this. As if trying to cover up an unfavorable scene after the other person had already seen it, the words only came across as barren and superficial. Actually, one might as well replace the as if with certainly there. It was a very undesirable situation. Having been caught off guard, Echidona probably shared Subaru's opinion. The only difference was that she just happened to be quicker than Subaru in taking action. And then, Julius. You are not Anastasia-sama, are you, Julius? Echidona, I want you to tell me. Even when it's already come to this point, the fact that you are still trying to hide it from me tells me you probably weren't a bad person before you died. Through a faint glimmer of hesitation, Julius asked Echidona to her face. Hearing this, Echidona muttered, why that's just, and for a moment appeared to be preparing to refute him, but Echidona once again, Julius stopped her with his call. And just like this, she turned Anastasia's face toward Subaru with an indescribable emotion stirring within those light onion-green eyes. But at this point, even Subaru couldn't think of a way to salvage this. Subaru, Julius, where do you want us to begin? Julius. From Anastasia-sama's body. In response to Subaru's question, Julius replied in a choked voice. That much was more than enough to discern his disturbed emotional state. But even so, it must be said that only a man like Julius would have been able to remain calm at a time like this, even if only on the surface. Or perhaps it may simply have gone too far beyond his limits, and too far beyond what emotions can convey. Echidona, ever since the battle with the witch cult in Prestella City, Anna's spirit has been sleeping deep inside her body. So right now, the one moving her body isn't Anna herself, but I, playing her role in her stead. Until today, Echidona probably thought it was no longer possible to go on pretending. Plainly, without any setup, she simply spoke as if laying out the facts. In the middle of defending Prestella against the witch cult, Echidona took Anastasia's place and dueled with the witch. Cultists after that, Anastasia's spirit had been asleep ever since. They had hidden this from Julius and Ricardo and all the members of the Iron Fang before they set out for the Pleiades watchtower. This fact was only shared between Subaru and Echidona. Julius, why would you only share this information with Subaru? Echidona, he was not under the influence of the Sin Archbishop's authority, and so he was the only person outside the chaos of the situation. Besides, I and artificial spirits of the same roots as Beatrice have sealed a contract with a spirits arts user as well. I must confess this was not my original intention. Only, Julius, only. Echidona, only. He saw through my act as Anna, so I had no choice but to tell him, hearing this explanation of why only Subaru came to know that it was Echidona inside Anastasia's body. Julius' eyes began to tremble beyond control. Of course, because Subaru saw through Echidona's performance. Julius, someone who barely knows her, something even a stranger should notice. I call myself a knight, and I didn't even notice it. Subaru, stop, you dumbass. You can't say that. Julius, Subaru, your situation. You were just in a bad situation. There was a huge thing that just happened to you, tying you down. And it wasn't just you, there's Ricardo and Mimi as well, wasn't there? I only noticed because, anyway, it just happened by chance. Listening to Julius mocking himself with those words, Subaru tried to put a stop to his self-injury. However, in his failure of his duty as a knight, there were no words that could console him. In reality, just what could Julius have done? Was he really to blame for this? The lord he devoted his loyalty to, his comrades with whom he swore his oath, his fellow knights that have always been his companions, and all the many, many more, everything he had accumulated up to now in his life as a knight, had collapsed like a wall of sand. How can he stand before them again? Stalwart, elegant, a knight. How could he ever be called that again? If being a knight meant never permitting oneself to succumb to one's pain like a common human being, then being a knight was a curse for Julius Euculius. Julius, it is the duty of a knight to eliminate chance and be certain at all times, Subaru. Then a knight is nothing but a troublesome title, isn't it? Julius, take back those words and do not say them to me again. Right now I'm afraid I've lost some part of myself. Subaru's consoling rationalization simply bounced off in the face of Julius' knightly convictions. Watching as Subaru fell speechless from the emotions clogging up his throat, Julius shook his head. Julius, let's get back on topic. Echidona, what is your intention? Echidona, to return this body to Anna. That is the reason I brought you all to the Pleiades watchtower, even more importantly than the victims of gluttony and lust, Julius. In other words, you mean to say you never wanted this, and you have no way to restore Anastasia-sama. Even if I slay you, placing his hand on the knight's sword at his waist, Julius narrowed his eyes and threw her this perilous question. Receiving this, Echidona cast down her eyes and gently touched her own chest. Echidona, that I am an evil spirit and have taken over Anna's body for that reason. I cannot give you any evidence to refute that speculation. So, if you are convinced that I am lying to you, even if you choose to destroy me, I cannot stop you. But at the end of her last syllable, Echidona continued after pausing only a beat. Echidona, But in that case, any possibility of restoring the consciousness of Anna's empty shell will be extinguished by your hand. In the worst case, it will become difficult to even preserve her life, and there is a chance that she will die. Echidona cut down Julius' suggestion and laid out her thoughts. Then, having said this, she softly lifted up her hands. Echidona. Of course, this is only a nonsense possibility I had no choice but to come up with because I want to live. Even I cannot say for sure whether my death would be the solution. If I must die so that Anna could live, I feel like I would be all right with that. Though I really don't want to die, Julius. And why would you be willing to do that for Anastasia-sama? Echidona. The relationship between Anna and I are not complete. Therefore, perhaps it would not be right for a common spirit to take a spirit's arts user's rightful place. Cutting off her words there, Echidona looked at Julius and Subaru in turn. It seemed almost as though she was admiring the odd-looking pair who shared a bond quite different than that of a spirit and a spirit's arts user. Echidona, I like Anna, and I have been at her side ever since she was a young child. So I do not wish to abandon her, and I want her to be happy. That is my reason, Julius. Echidona, Julius, I did not reveal this fact to you because it would have only lead to unnecessary confusion. Anna herself had wanted to keep my existence secret, if possible. In fact, she was the reason I had remained hidden all the way until what happened in Prestella. It was all thanks to that child. Even back in Prestella, Julius would have been quite shocked if Anastasia announced that Echidona had been hiding inside her all that time. Subaru, who had prioritized retrieving Emilia above all else, could not possibly imagine what storm must be churning within Julius' chest at that moment. Only, in such a short span of time, what his lord had kept hidden, as well as the secret pertaining to the fundamentals of Anastasia herself, were all revealed to him at a time when they should not have been revealed. Just how much must all of this be weighing on Julius? Julius, I can understand your relationship with Anastasia-sama. It is difficult to believe everything, but I have no choice but to believe you. At least, in that it would be thoughtless to do anything to you right now, Echidona. Oh, is that so? I am glad you chose rationally, Julius. I'm sure Anna would be glad as well, Julius. Letting go of the hilt of his knight's sword, Julius did not respond to Echidona's words and only remained in silence. But he was far from having understood it, and it left him a sense of shame to think about it. Yet in the blink of a moment, Julius cast this out of his mind, and Julius, I just want to confirm this. Anastasia-sama's ard is the price for your ability to continue to manifest yourself. So naturally, the more you strain yourself, the heavier the burden on Anastasia-sama's body will be. Is that correct? Echidona, correct. That's the right way to understand it. If I eat well, sleep well, get some moderate exercise, take a generally healthy approach to life, it'd be just enough to counteract the toll on Anna's ard, Julius. If that's the case, then why did you pull that stunt on the second level? Just as Echidona was slightly recovering herself, light-heartedly joking in between her words, Julius struck her with this unexpected question. Considering what happened on the second level, it's only understandable that he would point this out, Julius. During my fight with the second-level examiner, Reed Astria Anastasia-sama, using Anastasia-sama's body, you casted magic to assist me. It was at the time of the first clash between Julius and Reed. Faced with the overwhelming power of Reed's swordsmanship, when Julius was helpless and on the verge of defeat, Echidona casted her enormous magical power toward Reed. Far from being a decisive strike, instead, the load on Anastasia's body went over her limit and she fainted. But the problem was not the result. It was why did she do it? Just that. Julius, the burden of that act on Anastasia-sama's body could not have been light. After saying so much, your actions are still conflicting with your claims. So why? Subaru, that's. What Julius pointed out was also what Subaru had been wondering. Back there, Echidona acted when Julius had been beaten, and carrying an expression as though he was prepared to die. There seemed to be a lie somewhere, yet it didn't feel like it was precalculated. It must be pure speculation. But could Echidona have chosen to help Julius simply because, living inside Anastasia, they had already spent so much time together? Could it be something as simple as that? However, to Subaru's doubts, and to Julius' question, Echidona only replied, "I'm sorry," and deeply bowed on the spot. Echidona. Even I feel like a failure there. How should I say this to a bystander? It might just seem embarrassing, but I made that decision from a strategic point of view, Julius. A strategic decision. Echidona. At the time, I had no idea whether the examiner of the second level had intent to kill. If I did not do it, we might have lost the fighting power of Julius. Of course, I wanted to avoid it for Anna. Besides, Redestria had his back turned, and so it seemed a perfect opportunity in my eyes. But not only did it fail, I've caused you trouble, apologizing, and adding one more at the end for good measure. Echidona slowly raised up her body. There were no contradictions within her explanation. While it was true that to a bystander it would have looked like foolish behavior, Subaru couldn't find any basis to refute her reasoning, emotional ones aside. Could such a story really be swallowed so easily? But before Subaru could pursue the point any further, Julius, all right. But please be careful not to do anything rash in the future. Not for anyone else, only for Anastasia-sama, Echidona. Understood, Subaru? Wah! Julius gestured that he had understood and accepted, and nodded back at Echidona. Watching their exchange, Subaru kicked at the floor as if he wasn't sure if they were joking. Subaru, how can you be convinced by that? Julius. Subaru, I am convinced. Echidona will refrain from doing anything rash in the future. What else is there to say? This is a matter between Anastasia-sama and Echidona, and between Anastasia-sama and myself, Subaru. Julius, it seems you have been caught up in this by some strange mistake, but this is an internal matter within the Anastasia camp. This is not your pain to bear. Listening to Julius trying to distance him from the problem, Subaru clenched the back of his jaw. It's not as if Subaru was carrying this pain because he one-sidedly wanted to. Subaru, whether or not I take this upon myself is my own business, isn't it? Julius, so you can take this upon yourself, yet deny me the right to face my own problems. I don't seem to recall you ever telling me about Anastasia-sama and Echidona. Subaru. Julius, sorry, I shouldn't have said it. But it is the truth. Wrenching this out in a choked voice, Julius turned his eyes away. Within that voice, that stubbornness, Subaru finally noticed it. Julius had not remained calm at all. Far from hiding the tempest raging in his heart, he could not even keep it from seeping through to the surface. Having lost his own existence, even the one thing that remained to him, his loyalty to his lord, was a lie, and their promise to tell each other every concern had been broken. Even so, the man named Julius was not supposed to be subject to emotions. Julius, I don't intend to argue. For Anastasia-sama, we must find a way to deal with this situation as soon as possible. Echidona, I hope I can count on your sincere cooperation, Echidona. Of course. Since you have already found out, I suppose there is no reason for me to continue playing Anna anymore. Well, if you can tolerate me in the form of Anna, that is, Julius, that is fine. I must restore Anastasia-sama to the way she was, and looking at this form will remind me of what I must do, hearing of his intention to hurt himself to strengthen his resolve. Echidona put on a sad expression. But Julius had already turned up to the sky, without seeing her face. As if noticing for the very first time that the night sky from atop the balcony was untouched by the miasma, he squinted his eyes under the radiance of the stars. Julius, there is no reason to stay here for long. Let's go back inside. As for Anastasia-sama's body and Echidona, let's tell Emilia-sama and the others tomorrow, Echidona. Oh, all right. I will prepare for it as well. Saying this, Julius gently took Echidona's hand and began to walk. Surely it was exactly the same as what he had always done for Anastasia. Whatever was inside, his loyalty to Anastasia will not change. Even if she was sleeping deep within her body, even if she had forgotten Julius. Subaru, Julius. Feeling something painful at the sight of his figure, Subaru shouted out to him. Having been abandoned by memories while he still remembered everything about the others, having nothing left except to struggle, desperately relying on that sentiment, having been there himself, he understood that pain. Even if he was forgotten, he cannot forget. That thought alone gave him the impulse to move. Julius. Julius halted his steps, and still holding on to Echidona, did not turn around. The fact that his back remained perfectly straight, in spite of all the turmoil within his heart, was just totally frustrating. Subaru, isn't there something you want to say to me? Regarding Echidona, regarding Anastasia's body, he had kept it all from him. Tonight, he had promised to take over for spending time in the green room, but Subaru broke that promise and secretly met with Echidona on the balcony. He could make excuses. There were reasons. It's not that he meant to. But regardless of what he meant, or whatever his reasons or excuses, his heart could not pull free. So why won't you raise your voice to shout at me, swear at me, and just let out your rage? Subaru couldn't be sure whether it was his own sense of guilt or whether Julius truly thought this. Surely Julius wouldn't raise his voice or spit out abuses. Julius. There is Subaru. Julius, I understand. Why you thought you should hide this truth from me. You meant no harm. It was only out of concern and consideration. I agree with your apprehensions. If we switched places, I would have kept my silence as well. Subaru. Julius, but even so, looking up to the sky, with a voice as if wrenching it out. Julius, whether it is myself or Anastasia-sama or you, I don't want to be thought of as someone unworthy of being a knight. So far, I have to say I am loving this so much. One note is that I have very little context when translating this chapter, since I have not read Arc 6. In order to avoid mistakes, I've read the wiki spoilers for Arc 6 and the very end of Arc 5 during my final edit to double-check. But if you see anything that is inconsistent with the previous plot, please let me know as soon as possible. Thanks. Ray 0 Arc 6 Chapter 34. Coming out of the convenience store, there was a wondrous world. Part 1/4. Natsuki Subaru was born into the lax educational environment of the Heisei-era Japan. If we were to tell the whole story of the entire 17 years of his life, it would probably take all 17 years to do it. So, if we omit those parts and just briefly explain his current position, it would be along the lines of a third-year high school hikikomori. Or, in a little more detail, it would be a hopeless shit who goes against his parents' expectations and shuts himself in his own shell at a time when exams are coming up. He had no particular reasons for withdrawing himself. One ordinary weekday, the thought just occurred to him. It'd be a pain to get up today. And from there, his absenteeism was underway. Slipping further and further like this, the amount of time he stayed away from school grew longer, and before he knew it, he had become a shut-in who made his parents cry. Day after day, he spent in indulgent slothfulness, cutting off all communication, languoring on in this state, until Subaru. In the end, I got summoned to a parallel world. Ha! Subaru. While he was busy muttering to himself and trying hard to organize some understanding of the current situation, two white hands grabbed onto his cheeks. Looking up, there was a beautiful silver-haired girl in front of his eyes. Honestly, a very beautiful girl, with long silver hair that gleamed like moonlight and violet eyes like embedded gemstones. Her long lashes were trembling as she watched him with a worried gaze that took her beauty beyond the natural order of the world, such that it gave him the illusion that he was seeing some divine art piece magnificent enough to make all the artists of the world give up their pens. And then there was the question, why would such a beautiful girl be squeezing his face in a close enough range that they could feel each other's breaths? Subaru. NNNNNNN. Her smell is super nice. Subaru. Subaru. I'm Natsuki. Subaru, his name being called once again by that voice like the ring of a silver chime. Subaru spasmed out a smile in reply. Not just his face, but even his voice was shaking, and it wasn't entirely clear whether that could be called a smile. And for reasons Subaru could not understand, this girl seemed to be especially close to him. Otherwise, she wouldn't be talking and staring at him in such a super close distance like this. Subaru. Sorry, but you're acting a little strange, Subaru. Strain. What, like my eyes or something like that? Oh, no. Your eyes are still really scary looking like usual. I guess it's nothing, Subaru. My eyes are usually really scary looking. Trying to calm himself down by joking around a bit, he instead got hit by that totally unexpected comment. Watching Subaru recoil from that remark, the girl stuck out her tongue a little with "You're always like this." So cute. What's going on with this girl? Why does she seem so terribly close to him? And just, what did she mean by always like this, and acting so worried? Emilia, you might have come to that conclusion too rashly. In fact, something does seem off, I suppose. But Subaru's eyes just always look like that, I think. I'm not talking about Subaru's scary eyes right now. I don't really care if his eyes look scary, I suppose. Subaru, what's with this about my eyes being scary looking? It's a bad hobby to be picking on other people's weak points, you know. What's with you guys? Ah, no, I mean, you two are kinda cute and all. Subaru jumped himself up with great force and started blowing up in front of the beautiful girl, and the one she was talking to cute and fairy-like, a little girl in an extravagant dress, sporting a pair of no less elegant swirling drill curls. But his voice quickly trailed off. Inherently blunt, he had started blurting this out without thinking, before he realized that on the other end were two girls he had just met. Shutting himself up, he seriously recognized that he shouldn't have snapped. But the situation was too strange. If what Subaru imagined was correct, these two girls must be important key persons, like the villagers of the first village or something like that. So Subaru should straighten himself up and focus on first impressions. Subaru, coughing once, intending to start over, Subaru turned to face the two in front of him. Taking the two shocked-looking girls and the giant black lizard curled up behind his back into his gaze, Subaru took a step back, and Subaru, let me introduce myself again. My name is Natsuki Subaru. Jabbing a finger toward the ceiling, he held his waist with the other hand and struck out a pose. Sadly, there was no shiny reflective ball or disco music, but Subaru sparkled his teeth as he said this and tried to make the most of it. Subaru, shamefully ignorant, blown here by the immortal winds of gods and demons, an uncouth vagrant, but nonetheless pleased to meet thee. Plus, listening to him proclaiming this at the top of his voice, for a moment the other two could only stare at him stupidly. Getting no reaction at all, Subaru only continued maintaining his pose. As if whoever moves first would lose, he decided he was in it to win it. And so, after about 10 seconds had passed in silence, the two girls looked at each other and then, well, bud, we already know you. This is way too late for self-introductions, isn't it? Subaru, you are. And just like that, yanked out of his high-spirited self-introduction, his thoughts spilled out into that groan. It was only a little later when the seriousness of the situation became apparent. He was rather proud of that self-introduction, but seeing the way it was received, Subaru couldn't help but bend his neck. But after that, hearing it again from the two girls, it was clear why they were so surprised. Subaru and the girls' memories were different. While Subaru was supposed to be meeting them for the first time, they already knew who Subaru was. Of course, there were no such memories on Subaru's side. So then, in other words, Subaru, you don't remember anything. About this tower, about what happened in Prestella, and even about Ram and Beatrice, and about me too. Subaru. Yeah, that seems to be yes. Seeing Subaru with his knees neatly folded and stuttering out his reply, the beautiful girl widened her eyes. The sight of her pupils violently trembling sent a sense of intense guilt into Subaru's heart. But she was not the only one who was shocked by Subaru's reply. Your memories are gone. No way, there's no way that could happen. Muttering this in a whisper was the pale-faced little girl. Even more confused than the pretty girl, the younger girl was not spared from the shock. Sitting on the side of the ivy bed, the little girl sitting beside him was softly tugging on his sleeve. Seeing her delicate fingers lightly trembling, Subaru felt a pain inside his heart. Subaru, facing the two girls, shocked and lost in front of him, Subaru tried to think of something to say, but unfortunately nothing came to him. Honestly, there was so much cold water dumped on him at once that it would have been enough to drown in. Initially, what Subaru thought had happened was him just getting summoned to a parallel world. While getting summoned to a parallel world, even with the just attached to it, was already far beyond what would be considered common sense. It turned out to be even further away than he had imagined, although, one could say, he almost had the right answer. As far as Subaru was concerned, this was not the familiar world he had lived in for 17 years. It was clearly evident just by looking at the outlandish clothing and the inhuman beauty of these two girls. If that still wasn't enough, the giant black lizard the size of a horse should also be submitted to the court as evidence. He had heard of Komodo dragons that were supposed to be pretty big, but that would be nothing compared to the stature of this black lizard. And with the organic bed and chairs made out of ivy added to that, we have a pretty clear case on our hands. In other words, this was a world outside all common sense, an alternate, parallel world. Belonging in the so-called fantasy genre, a world wholly unknown to Subaru. Hi-yippee. I'm so excited to be doing a new Arc 6 chapter again. I've finished my last day of work on Monday, and I'm now free to translate full-time. I will still be prioritizing Arc 4, but as long as I can keep up daily releases, I'll use the extra time to translate the latest Arc 6 chapters. This chapter is quite long, so I'm splitting it into 4 parts. I expect to finish part 2 in about 2 days from now. Let me know if you find missing words and typos. Arc 6, Chapter 35, Thin Ice Relations, Part 3-3. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray, Zero Starting a Life in a Different World from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop, you Archbishop. Part 1 and 2 Parts 1 and 2 of this chapter are translated into English, but not translated by Witchcall Translations or one of our affiliates. Check the table of contents for the chapter link. Part 3 Emilia. Well, you were nowhere to be seen in the dragon carriage this morning, and we couldn't find you either in any of the rooms on the 4th floor, so we got pretty worried. Subaru's curiosity was piqued by the word dragon carriage, but he did not open his mouth in fear of interrupting Emilia's story. Perhaps the lizard who stood in the green room was related to earth dragons in some way. They did look like the type you'd see from a horse-drawn cart. He'd have to put off his curiosity in wanting to see the real thing, though. Beatrice. Betty was not at her wit's end as much as Emilia was, in fact. I was just bothered that I couldn't figure out where you, my contractor, was within this strange tower, I suppose. That's why I went with her to search around the tower for you, and after that, Subaru. And after that, Emilia. We found you collapsed in the White Library on the 3rd floor, and then brought you to the green room. Subaru breathed out a ah after hearing Emilia and Beatrice's joint explanation. Julius, the 3rd floor is one of the floors within this tower. We're on the 4th floor right now. We're going through them trying to reach the 1st floor, which is the topmost floor. It was thanks to none other than your knowledge that we already made it through past the 3rd floor. Subaru, thanks for explaining. Did you say thanks to my knowledge? Julius filled in for the missing details. Even so, for Subaru, the content seemed to be quite lacking in credibility. Nevertheless, Emilia continued where he'd left off with an "Yeah, Emilia, that's really how it happened. All we heard was gibberish, but you were able to solve it all by yourself, Subaru. You were really amazing." Subaru, ha ha ha, thank you, hey, no one says gibberish these days anymore. Emilia, Subaru, did I say something weird? Though Subaru had tried to awkwardly compliment Emilia, she remained silent as if something was up with her. For a split second, he could see the traces of some strong emotion flicker across her eyes, yet he had no idea what it meant. At any rate, he couldn't keep up with them, as if they were ripples rippling through a pond. Subaru, by the way, you said that I collapsed, and that you brought me to that grassy room, Beatrice. That room is protected by a special spirit. That spirit has the power to heal people's wounds. That is why we've laid Rem down there too, in fact. Subaru, okay, gotcha. So that's why you also brought me there. By the way, what are the chances that I lost my memories due to that room? Emilia. Well, Subaru batted one of his eyes shut as Emilia faltered in response, looking like she hadn't thought about that. Though this was only a hunch of his, regarding the intentions of this spirit or whatever, while those may be unknown, if it took the form of a plant, then he couldn't discount it having some kind of cruel nature. Flowers are pretty and filled with sweet nectar to get insects to carry their pollen. But they can also be like carnivorous plants who camouflage themselves to snare in insects to slurp the life out of them. It could have slurped his memories out of him instead of healing him. There was a chance of that. Echidna, it's quite a wild idea, but I heavily doubt that. In that case, something weird would have happened to me first far quicker, considering I've been in that room far longer than you have. Subaru, that something strange hasn't got anything to do with the original body's owner not waking up. Echidna, regarding Anna, that happened before we came to the tower. Her condition has nothing to do with the green room. And also, that's right. The earth dragon who was in the room hasn't forgotten about you, right? Subaru, ha, Echidna, that earth dragon is awfully attached to you. Suppose, for argument's sake, that the spirit in the room had a bad habit of slurping out people's memories. Don't you think she would have probably given you the cold shoulder? Subaru recalled the Earth Dragon that had nestled up to him just after he woke up. For sure that Earth Dragon had been extremely friendly towards him. If the reason behind that was because she'd originally been his Earth Dragon, then that made complete sense. Though what she'd said also surprised him. Subaru, that Earth Dragon is a she. Echidna, let's get back on topic. The chances of that room working such wickedness on you are not high at all. As far as I am concerned, it's the room you collapsed in that's far more of a problem. Yol said he came to in the Tegeta library on the 3rd floor, right? Emilia, yeah, that's right. Subaru collapsed on the white floor in that room. Emilia gripped her wrist tightly as she reflected back on that moment. Emilia, I carried you to that room all in a rush, and then tried to go call everyone, but Beatrice. Subaru woke up during that time and found himself in this condition, in fact. Therefore, it would be difficult to imagine that the green room did this, even time-wise, I suppose. It happened in that library, as I thought if something had happened, then this library or whatever was the source behind it. It seemed like they'd reached a common point of view, but Subaru didn't really get it. Perhaps because it was hard for him to imagine what kind of room this room they called a library really was. Subaru, Tegeta. What kind of room is this Tegeta library? The name sounds somewhat familiar. Julius, that library is a room containing the books of the dead. Subaru, the books of the dead, hey, that also sounds like some tuney shtick. Putting aside his interest for the name Tegeta, Subaru sunk his teeth into how he'd used the term books of the dead. Seeing his reaction, Julius gave a curt nod and then continued to speak, saying, "We have no concrete confirmation." Julius, but in this library there are a myriad of books bearing the names of people who are now deceased from all around the world. To read the books, you have to be qualified to do so. It's most likely the kind of thing where you can only read the books about the deceased you had some connection with. Subaru, again with the bad taste, what is written in those books? Julius, the life of the respective deceased, more or less. Intense thoughts swoop through your mind as if they're being scorched in. It's really not a matter you want to put yourself through over and over deliberately. There was a weight to Julius' words in his explanation, which could only have been expressed by one who had personally experienced this sensation. It seemed to Subaru that the memories of the dead were not something he wanted to have scorched into his mind. To say it frankly, experiencing this sort of shock was not something he was keen to do. Then, if he had collapsed in a library where such experiences were possible. Subaru, was I reading one of those books too when I collapsed? No way, so could something like that have damaged my mind. Echidna, I can't completely rule out the possibility. About that, Sage, what do you think? Shola, are you perhaps talking to me? While nodding at Subaru's guess, Echidna turned to face Shola with a meaningful look in her eyes. As well as that meaningful look, Sage was a really disproportionate way of referring to her. Were he to speak without restraint, Shola looked like the furthest thing from a sage in this room. Shola, no matter how many times you say that my answer's not Changin, I don't know anything about the tower except its rules. I was just told to be strict with rule breakers. No matter what Master does in the tower, I ain't got nothing to do with it. Subaru, I don't know why Shola's calling me something like Master in the first place, but Ram, don't worry. Your answer to that, Basu, was the same as before you lost your memories. You're just using this without saying anything because it's convenient for you, so gross Subaru. You can't just jump to such a convenient conclusion. Faced with Shola's gaze, Subaru couldn't help but express his bewilderment, which with no word of exaggeration showed a level of affection that was maxed out. Sure, it might be nice to get close with such a glamorous beauty when he thought about it ordinarily, but not knowing where her favor was coming from only created more confusion in him. Besides, her affection and favor made him feel strangely uneasy. It was something fundamentally different to the sincere feelings Emilia and Beatrice showed him, though he didn't know currently whether this was a harmful effect of his memories being gone. Subaru. In any case, that library you mentioned feels suspicious. If you're saying there might be clues in there that will get my memories back, then I reckon it's worthwhile going there to check. Julius, yes, we should. Our situation is one that even in the best of times we've had one problem after the other. The problems that plague us have seldom been few. Besides, with the circumstances becoming like this, you must honestly realize, Subaru, realize what? Julius. Just how much you've been making up for us. With his eye still closed, Subaru let out a small snort at Julius' words. His laugh hadn't been out of awkwardness, but a strained one that came from deep within how he felt. They were really overestimating him. The Armageddon must be coming for them to be relying so much on Natsuki Subaru. Bad things came in threes. Once again, Subaru had been made aware of how much of a hindrance he was, a trait he'd averted his eyes to. It was as if he were saying, "You've become a considerable burden, Subaru. Anyways, I'd like to go to the library after we finish eating, and if the memories that I lost are scattered about there, then I'd like to go pick them up and stuff them back in my mind." Emilia, geez, that's an odd way of putting it. It's really just like you, Subaru. I'm guessing the way you're saying, "It's just like me," isn't really a compliment, right? Emilia gave the flustered Subaru a small smile as she said that. The atmosphere around the place relaxed just a tad as he received it. They'd come up with a plan, and it felt like they were, in true sense, moving forward a bit. Echidna, I am sorry to interrupt you when the mood's like this, but there's just one more thing I want to ask you, Natsuki-kun. Subaru, well, you can go on ahead now that you've said this much. What is it? Echidna, well, this is just a curiosity of mine which isn't at all related to your memories or capturing the tower, but despite that. Echidna began to stroke her wavy hair, and with an adorable look on her face, compounded by a look of deep intelligence in her turquoise eyes, she asked, Echidna, what does that term you speak quite often of, parallel world, mean? Arc 6, Chapter 36, A Place of Relief. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray, Zero Starting a Life in a Different World from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop, you Archbishop fan art created by Wawaka 1212. What do you mean when you say parallel world? Subaru. Subaru felt as if his breath had been knocked out of him as he heard Echidna's question, sinking into silence as a result. During that time, everyone's gazes turned towards him. Although the emotions varied across everyone's faces, many of them showed tangible signs of doubt. Everyone was treating the term parallel world as something of an unknown. In other words, that meant the Natsuki Subaru, before losing his memories, had never bothered to explain it to them. Emilia, parallel world. Come to think of it, you used to say that before from time to time, didn't you, Subaru? Ram. It does ring a bell. Though from the way he acts like on a daily basis, I'd not paid any attention to that kind of nonsense. Subaru. Putting Emilia-chan aside, it's incredible how indifferent Ram acts towards me. She came as a stark contrast to Emilia, who was adorably immersed deep in thought, a finger of her brushed against her lip. Ram had coldly snorted out a ha in response to Subaru's wry-faced remark. However, their initial surprise had been softened thanks to having left this one cushion behind. The previous Subaru had never bothered to speak up about the parallel world, not to Emilia or Ram, nor even to any of the others whom he'd supposedly adventured together with. He didn't know for sure what that meant, but Subaru, were there some kind of restrictions to it? When I was thrown into this world, was I sworn by a god or goddess into not speaking about it, or the like? And first things first, what kind of mission am I here for? He cocked his head, however. Not even the M of the mission he'd been entrusted with came to his mind. Presumably, Subaru was summoned into this parallel world by someone working behind the scenes that had some expectation of him. By Subaru's reckoning currently, the likelihood of this someone being sort of like a god was very high. This god, or whatever that he didn't remember, had given him some kind of role and sent him to this parallel world. Thinking about it, this was the sort of promise you'd find with these parallel world thingamajigs. So, if losing his memories was something that this god found inconvenient, he could hopefully expect some follow-up to improve his situation. Subaru wants to believe this god is not the cruel sort who would just throw him into this fantasy world without giving him some generous benefits. Or perhaps, Subaru, I'd better find out if it's actually something I can't touch on, huh, Beatrice? Subaru. Subaru licked his parched lips and searched for a response for this situation. He winked at Beatrice, who was looking at him with unease, having caught ear of his muttering. He decided that he would address the question that had been posed to him about this parallel world. Even if by some chance speaking about it was forbidden by this god being, It was difficult to imagine there'd be some sort of drastic penalty that he couldn't recover from where he touched on this taboo. Surely, as soon as he would have spoke of the taboo, there wouldn't be anything drastic that would happen, such as being assailed by unbearable pain. With a little bit of anxiety, Subaru gently got his breathing under control. And Subaru, well, about this parallel world I spoke of, the word itself is written as from like different and world. In other words, I mean that the place we're in right now is in a separate world, Emilia. In a separate world, a parallel world, Subaru, aha. That's why I say parallel world, yet. Following Subaru's explanation, Emilia mulled over what he'd said, rolling the words out on her tongue. She was not the only one who had reacted like this. The others in the room were also pondering over that word. As it was from the pronunciation, Icekai, they'd received the word itself as something of an unknown. TL note. I have been localizing Icekai as parallel world for this entire chapter, as that's how it's typically translated. However, in this case, I can't really avoid writing it out in Japanese, so the above sentence makes sense. Just keep in mind for the whole chapter, to be honest, that parallel world equals Icekai, though he'd presumed that from how low their comprehension of the word parallel world was. Apparently, it seemed like the idea of a different world wasn't a common one in this world. Coincident with that, Subaru slapped his body to check for any changes. Subaru. Nothing seems to have happened to me. Putting it into words, Subaru ensured that nothing untoward had happened to him. As far as he could tell right now, there were no signs of any abnormalities having occurred. There was neither pain nor numbness, nor was there a strange voice sadly addressing him with "You've violated your instructions," or the people in his surroundings transforming into a flock of cranes, saying, "I did tell you to not to do that." TL note. This is a reference to Tsuru no Ongishi. He'd managed to deal with all the worries he'd had without any issues arising. Subaru. This isn't what I expected. Certainly, he'd thought that he hadn't talked about the parallel world due to having some kind of reason. However, nothing really came to his mind that'd be something that he'd get caught up in when it came to this. Subaru cocked his head to the side at the sensation of having parried that. Then Julius raised his hand up and said, "All right, Julius. I now know what the word parallel world means. I can take it as a term you yourself have coined, but there is a part of me that's thinking about its implication. Why do you reference that parallel world so often?" Subaru. Oh, that's right. Just explaining the meaning of the word parallel world isn't much of an explanation. Then, in other words, Julius, in other words. Following Julius' questioning, Subaru realized he had cut his explanation short, and clearing his throat, he went on to say, "Subaru, I come from this parallel world thing. I wasn't born and raised in this world. I'm some alien who got mixed up into this world halfway through. That's why for me this place is a parallel world." Indeed now he had clearly explained his position and circumstances. "I am someone who came to this world from a parallel world. Nice to meet you." Roughly speaking, this is what Subaru had told them. It was easy to imagine Emilia and the others to have been shaken by that bold confession. After all, it must have been a bombshell to them, since they didn't know parallel worlds existed. It really was no surprise that all the common sense they had up till now had been thrown out of whack, along with the shock they felt along with it, like their world had been turned upside down. After finishing his confession, Subaru took note of their concerns and cursed his own heedlessness. If he had made Emilia and Beatrice feel as if they'd been engulfed by a maelstrom of confusion, if he had made them do something like grieve, then he was responsible for having brought that about. How would he comfort such beautiful girls if they were to break down into tears? He had no experience with this. So, with a few seconds passing, feeling these anxieties, he glanced his eyes towards them. Subaru had imagined that he would find them looking pale, blood drained from their visage, with confusion etched on their faces. However, Emilia. "Ah, so you mean you're from beyond the Great Cascade." Subaru. The Great Cascade. Subaru's eyes widened at Emilia, who had timidly asked this question whilst frowning in though. They were words he hadn't come across before. Cascade. He thought must have been a waterfall or something, but this great cascade must be a big version of one. Perhaps he could think of it as a huge waterfall. Actually, no. What sort of connection did this big waterfall have with the parallel world in the first place? TL note. Chinese letter is a less common way of referring to waterfall, so Subaru muses it must be a Chinese letter. I used cascade versus waterfall to represent it. Subaru. No, definitely not. Nothing to do with waterfalls. I'm talking about a world that's completely different from this place and what your common knowledge is and stuff. Ram. So, then you're from beyond the great waterfall. How do they call it in your hometown? Barusu? Actually, no. I guess it's probably the other way around given that it's your hometown. The countries here surrounded by the great waterfall would be a parallel world. Your wild behavior makes sense to me now as well, Echidna. That's right. That must be the reason why I couldn't find anything no matter how much I investigated Natsuki-kun's origins, because he is from beyond the Great Cascade. Subaru. Well, hey, how are you all so quickly convinced with that? It wasn't just Emilia who had agreed with this conclusion. Even Ram and Echidna, who both appear to be quite intelligent, had agreed with it. For Subaru, their levels of belief towards this mysterious waterfall were nigh incomprehensible. The thought that there was a parallel world beyond a great cascade on the other side of a waterfall, where the heck was this tunneled wonderland? Beatrice, you may have no idea about it considering you've forgotten so much, in fact. But regarding the great cascade, it's at the far reaches of the world, and there are a few stories left behind from people coming from beyond it, I suppose. Subaru. I do quite like the sound of that, at the far reaches of the world. Beatrice, the great waterfall is said to be impossible to cross over, with the exception of dragons. It's the border between here and there. There's no one who knows what is on the other side of it. So, on the rare occasion that someone crosses over from that world, no one holds any basis to deny the words they spoke as lies or falsehoods, I suppose. TL note. Could also be the dragon instead of dragons. Japanese doesn't distinguish between that. Beatrice explained it for him, on the basis of the assent of the people listening in, who were showing their acceptance for it. The contents were iffy. There were some things that were difficult to imagine for Subaru with him not being an expert in the circumstances of this world. However, thinking about the term, Great Cascade, and its present explanation now, Subaru. So this place feels like a floating continent, something like you can't cross over to another continent without a dragon. Ram, Subaru, quit with those horribly disgruntled sighs there. You're gonna hurt my feelings. Ram looked at Subaru, who'd been trying to justify it best as he could, with a sense of staggering disappointment. However, the others also seemed to be regarding Subaru's talk the same way, pretty much. In the end, his floating continent theory was likely incorrect. Subaru, if I'm off base, then I'm off base, I get it. But I was sorta hoping to have a great eureka moment riding on Dragonback, if say my theory now had been correct. Meili, if you keep talking about it like that, Oni Isan's adorable earth dragon is gonna start sulking, isn't sh tildery? Subaru, yeah, that black earth dragon is mine, right? I'll let you have a ride on her later. Shola, I'm gonna be as wheel. I'm gonna be sulking too. Master, I think you should take better care of me and appreciate me better and love me more. Now that you have lost your memories, let our relationship restart. From zero. Subaru, you're noisy and damn clingy. Also, don't be so quick to poke fun at me losing my memories like you're talking about someone else. Shola noisily joined in the conversation, with Meili sitting clutching her own knees. Though Shola had intruded rather brusquely and said that was something which Subaru now was actually really grateful for. Of course, fretting too much about it was tough. From there, Subaru shifts his attention with a glance towards his surroundings. In his original world, though depending on the situation, Subaru had a reputation for not being able to read the mood from the people in his surroundings. However, no matter how unsuited he was at it, if the emotions were strong enough, then they could be easily read or seen. Not just Emilia and Beatrice, but also Ram, Julius, Anastasia, i.e. Echidna. Their expressions were all showing worry towards Subaru. For better or for worse, before losing his memories, Subaru would have been doing pretty well with the ladies. How enviable. How he would like to be told what kind of magic he'd used. Even if they did, he didn't at all believe he could put it into practice now. Subaru. Anyways, to sum up everything that's been said, at the edge of this world there's a waterfall called the Great Cascade, and occasionally people come from beyond it. And so you're saying I'm one of them as well. Emilia, from what I've heard from you, I can only assume that's the case. No. Subaru. Um. Subaru exchanged looks with the wondering Emilia. His arms were crossed by his side as he painstakingly hummed. To be precise, it was not Subaru's intended course of action to run counter to the general understanding which everyone had of the world. Nonetheless, even if Subaru thought that the parallel world and the Great Cascade were unrelated, he knew that he wouldn't make any progress in this situation if he continued to talk about it. Subaru. To make a long story short, it is. Within this world, there was no concept of parallel worlds. He didn't know whether this, beyond the Great Cascade, as Emilia and the others recognized it, suggested the existence of another world, or the world Subaru was in. In actuality, there may be other continent-like stuff across from the waterfall, and from there may be records left behind of a figure like Columbus who made it there, taking him as a weirdo. If so, he could safely say that a correct understanding of parallel world for them was already a lost cause. Subaru. By the way, did I never mention anything about the parallel world back when I had my memories? Emilia, thinking back to then, once in a while you make some mention the word parallel world. But this is the first time we have really talked properly about it. Beatrice. Betty agrees with Emilia, in fact. The others affirmed the answer to his question with gestures, whereas Emilia and Beatrice with words. The prior Subaru hadn't spoken to them about the parallel world. Perhaps he deemed that they wouldn't make heads or tails out of it if he'd spoken about it like he had now. Or Subaru. I guess because I had been stopping myself from talking about it. Julius. Subaru. Subaru. I know nothing. Hey, if I'm not the only so-called parallel worlder there's been, then do you know anyone else? A person from the other side of the Great Cascade, or Castaway, whichever. Perhaps there were a lot of people drifting in from different worlds. Maybe there was a community of sorts where such people gathered. However, Subaru's hopes were denied by a shake of the head from Julius. Julius, sorry, the existence of a castaway, as you call it, is very rare. Most people who claim they are from beyond the Great Cascade are lying. What they say are generally pipe dreams or fabrications. Some of them set their sights on trying to extort people out of money, whereas others are simply trying to influence people of their fanciful beliefs. Subaru. Oh well, yeah, I can see that happening. As much as you would like to believe such stories, the majority were the works of fiction or embellished rumors, given that there was no way to make sure. Once one's imagination creation was set loose with these dreamy stories or ennui tales, they became a breeding grounds of reverie. Even if people, like Subaru, who were genuinely from another world existed, their existence would be buried under countless falsehoods. Echidna, honestly, my interest in the Great Cascade is never-ending, but it seems it really has no relevance to our current situation. It would be a good idea to simply end this with establishing that Natsuki-kun's unknown hometown and the knowledge he has have been settled. Echidna had broken what had been an awkward silence that had been forming. Originally, she had been the one asking Subaru about it. Although there were still parts unfamiliar to her, and she was most likely unsatisfied, Subaru welcomed her ending the conversation there. Besides, the more he talked about his original world, the more he would have to face the problems that he had left behind. That made his heart heavy and ache. By concentrating on the situation in front of him, he could try and distract himself from these feelings. Subaru, that's it about me. I understand that you all care about me and love me, but I feel like we aren't going to make any progress talking about this leisurely. Why, first things first. He didn't know what had directly caused his memory loss, but the place where the Subaru with his memories intact had supposedly last ventured, he wanted to check what had happened there. Beatrice, you will want to check the Taygeta library, I suppose. Subaru nodded at Beatrice, who had beaten him to voicing out his thoughts out loud. So with all that said and done, the group headed out towards the Taygeta library. Subaru was feeling quite nervous about what would be awaiting him there. The way there wasn't free of its troubles, though. That was because Subaru. Emilia-chan, why are you holding my hand so tightly? Emilia. Well, it's because I'm worried about leaving you by yourself, Subaru. I need to keep you in arm's reach. So I came to conclusion, given that it'd be good to hold hands from the get-go. Subaru, I like the simple, quick nature of that conclusion, but like this, it's way more embarrassing. Subaru lifted up his hand that was being held by Emilia, aware that his cheeks were getting flushed. Her slender, cute fingers were gently holding his hand, and he worried about whether his palms were sweating. In reply to Subaru's words, Emilia raised her eyebrows in a huff and said, "Geez, Emilia, don't be like that. Beatrice is also holding your hand, so it's not just us two together. Subaru, there's a difference between holding the hands of a child compared to one of a beautiful woman. There's a big difference between them, like that when cold rain is falling again on this day too, or the difference between the heavens and earth, or night and day. Emilia, I'm sorry, I don't really get what you're saying." Emilia spared Subaru no quarters, what with him having a record for losing his memories as a result of being left to his own devices, even with all the excuses he was spouting out. God damned you, memories, and me for having lost them. Beatrice, now that statement is unpardonable, but it's as Emilia says. Subaru ought to follow along obediently and be well cared for by Betty and Emilia, I suppose. Subaru, oh yeah. This is where we put Beatrice in the middle, and I and Emilia hold hands with you from both sides, young couple style. I'd be down for that, but wouldn't that not be uncool? Beatrice. Subaru isn't Subaru unless he's uncool, in fact. Subaru. What kind of assessment is that? He ended up taking that scathing evaluation right to him from Beatrice as well, who was holding his other hand. Julius, who was leading the way ahead, looked back towards Subaru a few times, and Echidna, who had been following right behind him, would explain to them, one by one, what lay around each corner. Ram was sharp-tongued whenever she spoke out. However, Subaru was the only one who knew that despite her outward appearance she was suffering inside. He wondered if he should talk to someone about her, but he doesn't know who he could possibly talk to regarding what she was experiencing. In a way, it was only Scholler and Meili, who were chatting together with each other at the back of the group, who were mentally soothing for Subaru right now. Subaru. Well, they're not really going to be useful for anything, Meili. Somehow I don't think you are being polite right now, Oni-san. Scholler. Master's mind is always like that. It would be a waste to dwell on it. You'd be shocked if you all peeked inside. It's all pink anyways. Makes me want to pull away. Pink Brown, Shamless School Tilde, TN. Scholler is making a reference to https://n Wikipedia org/wiki/Herenchi Gakuin. As for what she means by this reference, no clue since I haven't watched it. Subaru. Doubt we'd find either shame or schooling in you, Scholler. Master's doing my entire knowledge. Master's doing tilde. Mere conversation with her made his head ache. Whilst they had been exchanging these bouts of conversation, the party had gone up the stairs and arrived at the Tegeta library on the 3rd floor. It was quite expansive, almost as if it transcended time and space. Subaru. So this place is Tegeta. There are quite a lot of books in here, just as I'd heard. Subaru breathed in awe as he looked around the Tegeta library, marveling at the sheer number of books there. Indeed, this was a sight that was beyond anyone's imagination. Subaru was quite the avid reader, reading light novels, manga, strategy guides, etc. But he had never been surrounded by so many books. Naturally, compared to the National Diet Library or something, those would probably win out, however. They would only gain that due to the difference in space there was. Either way, the meaning behind the picturesque scenery in front of him wasn't just down to the sheer amount of stuff there, Subaru. If the books of the dead are here, then wouldn't that mean that there are as many books here as people who have died? If it has been recording non-stop since the time of the Homo sapiens, then there literally must be an overwhelming amount of records here. Subaru didn't know the scale of this world, but if the records of the dead were books, then the quantity of books would be immeasurable. Even if he tried to find a book, such as one with the name of a deceased person he knew, he would not be able to physically find it. Subaru, in a modern-day library, a lookup function is indispensable, but here, Beatrice. I don't know what you mean by lookup function or whatever, I suppose. However, there is no one else more similar to a librarian here than Betty. Got no choice but to start checking, I suppose. Subaru. This is like looking for a 100-yen coin in the middle of a desert. Warily, Subaru placed his hand on the spine of a book. Pulling the tome from the bookshelf, it easily fit into his hand, and he didn't feel like it was anything special when he looked at it. It was just a plain old book. There was no design to it on the cover other than its title. In all, it could be mundanely described as being a very plain book. When it came to the issues he had with it, Subaru, damn it, I can't read the title. The title was written in illegible, squiggly characters. From what he had heard from Emilia and the others, the title of the book was meant to be the name of someone who had died. If the dead was someone you shared some connection with, then apparently you could read over their memories in life. However, Subaru could not even comprehend what the letters meant in the first place. With his memories now at jeopardy, he doubted that having such connection would even make sense. Subaru. Well, this may be difficult. Emilia. Subaru. Subaru, who had been lost in thought, looked around in surprise at hearing Emilia abrupt shout. In an instant, the book he had picked up was wrenched from his grasp by Emilia. She stepped back from him, holding the book to her chest. Subaru. Ha, Emilia-chan. Emilia, don't be so careless. Subaru, do you understand? You must have lost your memories here, you get that right. Subaru. No, wow, that's overblowing it. Emilia said that as her complexion changed. To that, Subaru gave a scratch of his cheek, accompanied by a strained smile. However, it seemed that only Subaru was taking the situation lightly. Beatrice. Subaru, listen to Emilia. Refrain yourself from acting so impulsively, I suppose. Julius. I agree. You should be careful and refrain yourself from performing such a rash action. Subaru. MH. Both Beatrice and Julius had beseeched caution from Subaru. His throat had seized up, unable to reply to either of them. It wasn't animosity that welled up in his heart, but rather shame from his awkwardness. Certainly, he may have been acting a little too carelessly. Shola, PFFFFD, Master is getting angry, you look so sad. But, I don't mind even if Master's acting like a pitiable naughty kid. Subaru, shut up. Don't poke fun at people who are reflecting on themselves. Echidna, all right already. It'd be a bother to be interrupted like that again. In truth, Natsuki-kun's actions were a little rash, but we've also already established that. With a hand covering her mouth, Shola was laughing away at Subaru's mistake. Echidna had forced herself between Subaru and Shola as the former snapped at the latter. Then, whilst gently stroking her scarf, she said, Echidna, Natsuki-kun, you were unable to read the title of the book, is that right? Subaru. Oh, yeah, that's right. Echidna, what you can see here is that losing your memory, as he is, will interfere with your cognitive abilities, such as your literacy skills. That is why he was speaking of parallel worlds. Beatrice. Sorry, but Subaru began to study the alphabet when he arrived at Roswell's mansion. Echidna. Echidna, who had tried to speak confidently about it, was left dumbfounded by Beatrice's retort. Not paying any regard to Echidna's lack of response, Beatrice crossed her small arms. Beatrice, Subaru could not read or write the I alphabet until he came to the mansion, I suppose. The elder sister of the two sisters, who served as his instructor, should know about that too, in fact. Ram. Yes, it is exactly as Beatrice-sama says. From the start, Barusu couldn't read or write, so I dedicated myself to teach him. It seems my efforts were wasted, seeing him in this current state. Subaru. Sorry, I wasn't aware there was such an episode. Subaru raised his voice in apology in reply to Ram's resentful complaint. Taking a sidelong glance at the occurring exchange, Echidna cleared her throat. Echidna, ahum, it seems I was way off the mark. You can forget what I said. Julius, no, it's not as off the mark as you may think. At least we have discovered that Subaru's memories were lost after coming to Lugnica. Ram. In other words, Barusu is just useless baggage that doesn't serve any purpose in this library. Ram scathingly added to Julius' confirmation. Subaru remained silent as he didn't want to stir up any more trouble upon himself. However, it was Julius who spoke with a short nod, saying, Miss Ram's words are correct, Julius. Her manner of saying it aside, that's how it is. In any case, we can't let Subaru relive what happened the night before. We should be the ones to look for clues in here. Echidna. Yes, that would be safer. Ram. I don't have any objections. Are Emilia-sama and Beatrice-sama okay with it? Beatrice nodded back towards Ram, saying, I understand, I suppose. Emilia turned towards Subaru, looking at him with quite a serious expression in her eyes. Emilia, Subaru, please wait here without doing anything rash. The memories you lost, me and the others, we will find them. Subaru, oh, okay, understood. It feels annoying not being able to do anything, but I believe in Emilia-chan and everyone else. I will wait here quietly. Emilia, can you really wait here quietly? You won't wander off as you please. Subaru, I don't need reminding. I'll be fine. I'm not a 5-year-old kid. I can wait here quietly. I can promise it if you want. Emilia, so maybe you're not going to be quiet after all. Subaru, what do you mean? Granted, he had brought out that promise to make her feel peace of mind. However, it had ended up in only sowing more mistrust. Looking around his surroundings, he saw that, Julius and Echidna aside, Beatrice and Ram were merely shrugging their shoulders in reply, as if to say that's how it is. In any case, Emilia, Subaru's going to quietly wait here at the front, okay? In response to Emilia's sincere appeal, Subaru decided that he would reluctantly wait for them at the front of the library. He sat down, hugging his knees, watching over the party who had begun to split into two separate groups to search the library. In one group were Emilia, Beatrice, and Ram. In the other there was Julius and Echidna. Looking on with an air of confusion, it seemed that Emilia and Echidna respectively were leading these uneven teams. Melee, teaming up to search must be sorta like insurance so they don't end up like Oni-san. After all, Oni-san's strong point is that he attracts trouble. Subaru. I may have no memories. Having no memories is an issue, so obviously I cannot even answer back to that. No, I don't want an assassin of all people to tell me this. Melee, because I am totally concerned about trifling matters like that. Subaru, I don't think you can call that a trifling matter. In the first place, she had clicked her tongue at Subaru, interrupting his train of thought. He turned to face her. The voice had come from far away from the bookshelves, next to the wall which Subaru had been standing at. Melee was standing there with a coquettish expression on her face not at all appropriate for her age. Her braided hair was arranged so that it dangled down to her shoulders. What? She asked him, cocking her head to one side. Subaru, I thought you had joined the search. Are you not going to? Melee, yeah, I won't join it after all. I am not really a proper companion of Oni-san and One-sen's friends. Subaru, not really a proper companion. Melee, I told you so, didn't I? I'm an assassin. Well, as I failed my mission, it's more like former assassin. Originally, I was sent here just to help out, not bothered about anything more. Subaru. In other words, I get the feeling like this was your bail condition, whether a former one or whatever. T's quite the drastic decision to take to adventure along with an assassin among your compatriots. Melee. Yeah, that's exactly right. I suppose there really is something wrong with them. Melee giggled and placed her hand on her mouth as she said this. Subaru snorted at her attitude, and Subaru. I get why Melee wouldn't go with them. What about you? Shola, hummy tilde. I cannot read and write anything, so I am of no use whatsoever. I'm with Master, so the book's contents are all gibibiirish to oos. Shola was leaning against the wall, on the opposite side from Melee, laughing as she responded. She proceeded to move over and pulled Subaru by his left arm towards her voluptuous body. Such a soft, warm feeling. Instinctively, he untangled himself from her. Subaru, you are. Shola, wah, Master is such a meanie tilde, Subaru. I'm not a meanie, stop that. It's improper for a girl to have done that. Such things should be reserved only for the guy you like. No, don't do that because even a guy you like would be turned off if you came at him like that so abruptly. You're doing yourself absolutely no good by behaving like this. Shola, PFFFFD, talking about a girl's sense of dignity again. Master seriously never changes. TL note. The way Shola said, Master seriously never changes, is in its original form. Japanese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Chinese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter. Read, Oshisama Magikawanai, which sounds very similar to Subaru's own Emiliatan Magi X, EMX pattern. Shola pouted at Subaru as she protested against his attitude. However, hearing her words had made Subaru look down in embarrassment. Shola, Master, Subaru, you think I haven't changed as well? Subaru blurted this out to Shola almost instinctively. He had heard this phrase several times over the course of the few hours he had been awake. It had seemed like a salvation to him to hear this, but also at the same time a curse. He could be pleased that he had not changed, or he could lament that he had not changed. Shola, I'm not so sure. Nevertheless, despite such turmoil brewing inside Subaru, Shola had said that so readily. He was, as expected, astonished at her reply. Perhaps it had been a mistake to have let her hear some of his more delicate worries. Subaru, you know it was idiotic of me to have asked you that. Shola, gah, Master is not an idiot. When you say it like that, I'm gonna get angry, Master or not. My master is a wonderful person. I want you to be confident in yourself. Subaru, I really don't understand your position in all of this. She would point and laugh at a depressed Subaru, and then get angry when Subaru mocked himself. The only thing that stayed consistent was the topic related to him. Hearing Subaru's question, Shola pushed her ample-sized chest forward and smiled with her hands on her hips. Shola, whether you're changed or not, Master is still Master, so I don't really give a toss. So long as you do as you please, Master, I will always follow you. Subaru, even if it results in crazy stuff. Shola, well, even if we end up in strange situations, I can always pry things open by force. Master may have forgotten, but that is the relationship between Master and me. Subaru. All of her candid words, everything Shola had said, showing nary a trace of duplicity or anything like that, struck him they had, many times over, causing Subaru to give a faint gulp. He turned his face away so that Shola wouldn't be able to see it. Meili, Oni-san, Subaru. Seeing Meili looking at him there, he turned his face away back to the opposite side again. Shola, Master, what's wrong? Subaru, gah, geez. Subaru couldn't escape to the left of him or to the right. He could only kneel down and look down at the floor, holding his head in his arms so nobody would see his face now. Subaru got the sensation that Meili and Shola were looking at each other with him curled up in between them. They wouldn't understand. No, he doesn't want them to understand. He felt like he'd been saved by those vapid, vacuous, gap-filled words. He felt like "you needn't get worked up" showed through more eloquently in her attitude than in her words. Meili, Oni-san, you're strange. Shola, Master was strange from the very beginning, but I love him for that too. Subaru had nothing he could say in response to the exchange of those girls. That went way over what he could comprehend. He merely felt like the feelings of tension rushing through his mind had eased off, if only a tad. It was a few minutes before Emilia and the others came back sans results that Subaru somehow warded off his impulses and stood up. Tien. It's hard to convey the meaning of when he tries to explain what the word isekai means in English due to language limitation. I will try to explain it. In this sentence, essentially Subaru takes the word isekai and splits it up into Chinese letter, Japanese letter, Japanese letter, to differ, pronounced Katanaru, and Chinese letter, world, pronounced sekai. In Japanese, the cast don't know what the word isekai actually means. The closest thing I could think of doing is making them confused what a parallel world was that also keeps consistent with Chicken's translation of the word. Realizing this makes the exchange make a bit more sense compared to the English. Arc 6, Chapter 37, A Papier-Mâché's Dream. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray. Zero, starting a life in a different world from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop, proofread by Furuta/U/Grace Tarperd Review /U/Review of 524 disclaimers. Note to anyone reading this, it's in the process of retranslation. This was one of my first ever TLS and it's very poor quality, so I am trying to fix a lot of it. View here. The search of the third floor library. Taygeta had ended with absolutely no results. Emilia, I am so sorry. Tried really hard to look for clues. Emilia bowed her head in apology towards Subaru after bringing him those fruitless results. Subaru politely accepted the apology, but in all honesty, he wasn't that disappointed. Of course, it certainly would have been for the best if he could have regained his memories here. Nevertheless, he was lacking in awareness in having lost his memories in the first place, so Subaru did not feel overly emotional that the search party had yielded unsuccessful results. Shola, Master, what's up, Tilda? Subaru, oh, it's nothing. Shola glanced towards Subaru, cocking her head at him with a happy-go-lucky expression on her face. Subaru shrugged his shoulders, feeling a bit uneasy at the sight of her and her long, jet-black braided hair swinging about. There was no ill will, malice, or even any profound meaning to her. In the end, it meant she wasn't really thinking about anything, but her attitude being like this appeared as a relief to Subaru right now. At least it was better than seeing the others always looking at him like he's always done something, constantly worrying over him and watching over every single step of his. Julius. Apparently, there doesn't seem to be a pattern to how the books are arranged. It would have been too much to ask to have found them lined up ordered by their titles or in chronological order. And on the flip side, books which we would have found yesterday on one bookshelf cannot be found today on the same one. Subaru. So yet another troublesome and unfriendly library. Huss Subaru wrinkled his nose at Julius' remarks. Not only did the library boast an overwhelming collection of books, but the books happened to move around scrambling themselves on their own accord, giving him absolutely no hope as a library user. Even if there happened to be the book they needed, they would never find it. Subaru. Why can't we just pull out each book one by one and stack them onto the floor? There ain't no end bookshelf at the back, since the bookshelves all go around the room in a circle, but say we pick a starting point and go through them one by one, surely we'll find something somewhere. Echidna. In my opinion, it'd be wiser to not. Probably doing that would be prohibited by the tower's rules. It would probably be considered as disrespecting the library. Echidna, cocking her head to the side, dismissed Subaru's suggestion. Beatrice crossed her arms and agreed with Echidna with a curt, "I suppose." Beatrice. Betty, being an experienced librarian, could never overlook leaving a book on the floor. You cannot show such disrespect to books like that, I suppose. Ram. Beatrice Sama, I feel like you often left a large amount of books stacked up on the floor. Beatrice. Those were the ones that instructed me how to correctly arrange the library, in fact. Ram narrowed her pale crimson eyes at Beatrice's awkward excuse, though she didn't bother to reply back to her. She merely let out a deep sigh, to which Beatrice's expression turned to one of shock. Alongside this librarian talk, Subaru butted in and said, "Prohibited," with a puzzled expression on his face. Subaru, I am sorry, it looks like this is something I've not heard of again. What is prohibited? Emilia, oh, I am sorry. It looks like I didn't explain it properly. Emilia raises one of her fingers in answer to Subaru. Emilia, in actual fact, there's a bunch of rules that we can't break in the tower, like such as, don't leave this tower until we finish its trials, don't do anything bad to the library, don't damage the tower, those kinds of rules. Subaru, I see. Who would have guessed that putting books on the floor in this library was a bad thing, by the way? Who judges whether we've broken any rules? Shola, oh, that's where I come in. Me, the Star's Keeper, shall. Meaning, if a rule violation happens, I'll kinda end up freaking out, and I'll become a cold-blooded killing machine. That's why I prefer if you did your best not to. Subaru, you. A cold-blooded killing machine. Subaru could only laugh dubiously at Shola, who cheerfully lifted her hands up whilst making this proclamation. No matter how much you believed Shola's frivolous speech, he thought it unlikely that she could ever transform into a cold-blooded killing machine. In the first place, how much damage could she really do with the slender arms of a woman? Even that should not apply in a magical fantasy world. In fact, Subaru had heard that Shola was not his or Emilia's ally, but rather was the Star's Keeper, warden of this Pleiades watchtower. She held a different position compared to how Meili had found herself here. Supposedly, she was here to aid in advancing the trials inside this tower. Yet he had no such impression of her actually doing this. Subaru, if you seriously hold such an important position, you're going to have to let us off the hook for the sake of our friendship. Shola, oh, you are such a bad guy. Master is quite dirty, but I can't get enough of that slightly wicked side of yours. There's tons and tons of stuff I'd like to hear from you, were it one of your wishes, Master, but that is irrelevant to my will. Give up on that hope and show good sportsmanship. Act fair and square and give it your all. Subaru, you're no use. Shola, HNTL note. The way Shola said master is quite dirty is. Japanese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Japanese 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 letter, Oshisama Majidatii, which you know, sounds very similar to Subaru's own emt or M pattern. Coincidence? Possibly. His strategy of trying to bring her to his side ended with unexpected failure, as her supervisory authority wasn't enough. At the same time, he had to keep Shola's forehead away with his finger as she kept trying to bring her face close to his in the middle of the conversation, forcing her charming face back. And while doing that, Subaru let out a feeble sigh. Emilia, it really kinda seems like Subaru and Shola are both really good friends. Emilia whispered this just after Subaru had finished talking with Shola. Hearing Emilia whisper it to him, Subaru turned to face her and awkwardly stammered a no, 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 that isn't so, to her. Emilia. His attempt to lighten the mood of the situation was not working. Subaru immediately stopped when he saw Emilia's expression, her eyes downcast. Emilia was not smiling. Merely her eyes, framed by her long lashes, were cast down, and wavering within her amethyst eyes was a seeming sense of loneliness. Subaru's face sunk at seeing her expression. Immediately noticing his reaction, Emilia frantically waved her hands back and forth at him in denial. Emilia, oh no, it's really good that you're both friends. Such a gloomy face does not suit you. Subaru, yeah, it's okay. Feigning a smile, Emilia somehow blurted those words out to herself. Subaru. Ah, Emilia-chan. You know, Subaru holds his head as he struggled to find anything he could say to Emilia. He felt like he would be saying the wrong thing no matter what he said. Likely, the only way he could find a correct answer would be amidst his vanished memories. He was in a nightmarish situation where all the options that were presented were probably false answers. Under these circumstances, saying anything to the sad girl sitting in front of him would be, "Hey, so what are we going to do now?" A soft voice broke the awkward silence. It had been Meili who had asked this from where she sat on Taygeta's floor, resting her chin in her hands. She looked up at the adults in the room from her seated position and spoke. Meili, we can't find any leads to recovering Oni-san's memories here. It's a shame, not that I particularly care, but I wonder what we should do next. Are we still trying to find clues on how he lost his memory? Or Meili cut her words off there, instead turns her face upwards and pointed at the ceiling with her right hand, smiling quite provocatively. Meili, let's go upstairs. Let's postpone finding Oni-san's memory for a short while. Echidna. Yes, that seems like something to consider as well. Having heard Meili's suggestion, it was Echidna who had responded with a thoughtful look on her face. Emilia's eyes widened at hearing her agreement. Emilia, wait, I feel the same sense of wanting to hasten. But I can't leave Subaru like he is. Echidna, I understand your view. It would be certainly preferable for me, Julius, and everyone to return Natsuki-kun's memory. However, we can't ignore the current situation either. Natsuki-kun's memory ceasing to exist may be linked to the tower's trial. Emilia, Subaru's memories are linked to the trial. It wasn't just Emilia who had reacted like this. The others had all turned their heads in surprise towards Echidna as she said this. Realizing she had the attention of everyone, Echidna closed one of her eyes and said, "May I? Echidna, there is no doubt that common sense barely applies when it comes to this tower. However, it would be foolish to think what happened to Natsuki-kun is unrelated to the tower. That's why we all went to Taygeta in the first place. To put it broadly, we're thinking that his memories were taken from him by the tower. Subaru, I think that sounds chuny and cool, that memories can be stolen by the tower. If it wasn't me who was experiencing this, I would be excited to hear more of the story. But to begin with, Taygeta's trial is complete. Isn't it strange to try and pull out my memories from here? Echidna. Yeah. Therefore, I think that your memories weren't stolen because of the trial, but rather because you must have broken one of the rules. Even if the trial of Taygeta is over, the functions of the entire tower haven't been carried out. It's just like taking out a book or disrespecting the library. Echidna had explained her reasoning, and Subaru was left to puzzle it over in his mind. In conclusion, Echidna's reasoning alluded to this. Subaru. So you're saying yesterday I must have broken one of the rules of this place, and bam, my head went kerplow. To be honest, trying to search for loopholes sounds like something I would do. I am not able to make any objection to her reasoning. Emilia, but wouldn't that have made Scholar angry? Echidna had nodded at Subaru, acknowledging his conclusion. However, Emilia had butted in and pointed towards Scholar, clearly remembering their previous interaction. Emilia, if he had violated any rules, won't that have made Scholar angry? It should be a completely different story to what we are experiencing here with his memories. Ram, that's right. I understand the possibility that Barusu foolishly broke the rules, but Shola has not bared her fangs yet at Ram or any of you. What do you make of that? Ram glares at Shola with her pale red eyes. Beholding her gaze, Shola leapt up with an Iep and hid behind Subaru. Ram, no way would you have seriously abandoned your role because of Barusu. Julius, that is very optimistic of you to say for sure. However, as Miss Shola said some time ago, she's barely aware of her being the one who actually carries out the punishments in the tower. Shrugging his shoulders, Julius stands next to Echidna and supports her opinion. Julius, if we are presented with the four things which are prohibited, and you break one, the given penalty may not be equal for us. Miss Shawler could turn into our enemy, and in some cases attack us. For example, desecrating the library in some way could result in having your memories stolen. Julius cut his words off there and promptly turned his yellow eyes towards Subaru. Subaru. There were some really complex emotions swimming inside Julius, eyes which Subaru could not distinguish. Julius continued his speech with, "Although, Julius, we do not have any time or actual proof to test whether this guess is correct. Ram, there is a way to check. If it's truly just losing your memories, then we can just sacrifice the 4 or 5 hours of memory that Barusu has had since he's been awake. That ensures that the damage will be minimal. Subaru, stop using people's memories as guinea pigs. Memories still shape that person. Even if it's only 4 or 5 hours, I'm still myself. I'm not a bad Natsuki Subaru. Ram, I was joking." Subaru's entire body shivered at Ram's blunt remark, which he had said behind his back. Whether it had been a joke or not, Subaru had no clue. It was likely it was. Dare he say that her lofty attitude was probably just a facade. It is in her nature that she does not want to show any weakness to people. After all, could it be related to what had happened a short while ago? In the end, it wouldn't surprise him if she just wished to erase her embarrassment from the time when Subaru had seen her frail side. Anyways, other than whether Echidna and Julius' reasoning are correct or not, one possibility was worth considering. Regarding his memory loss, that Subaru. To put things plainly, both of your opinions, regardless of whether they have a nugget of truth within it, maybe we're all grasping at straws here, in that I am against. Even if we're like sorta just floundering around, I don't really get the feeling that the memories I lost are gonna be found, you know. Emilia, does what you're thinking have any basis at all? Subaru, just a hunch. Besides, if this is really part of the tower's trial, then maybe if we clear 'em, I'll get my memories back, right? Emilia. Subaru wagged his finger left and right as Emilia and the others exchanged looks in response to his words. However, they hadn't reacted negatively to his thoughts. Rather, there was a trace of hope beginning to appear on their faces. Firmly placing her palm on her chest, Emilia began to rapidly nod. Emilia, yes, that's right. If Subaru's memory has been slurped up by the tower, then surely they may be returned after completing its trial, Subaru. The expression you used, being sucked up, I get quite the super cute feeling from it. But that's the spirit, that's the spirit. Emilia, that's the spirit. Subaru smiled in relief at Emilia as she had jumped up and made a cute, triumphant pose. Beatrice, who had been looking on, shook her head in exasperation. Beatrice, geez, I really don't understand which one of you is the one being encouraged, in fact. So she let that out like that. Certainly, with this, their positions were opposites. However, Subaru thought that was fine. After all, he had found some hope in this situation, and some of the vigor had returned to Emilia's eyes. For that, Subaru had felt quite a great sense of relief. Such a gloomy face did not suit a young lady like her. Besides, she had been worrying about Subaru from the depths of her heart. 'Twas quite painful to think that he'd been the reason behind making her look so gloomy. Subaru. And I was the one who showed such a move on a woman way out of my league. Beatrice, I have no idea what he is saying. For now we will adjourn finding Subaru's memory, I suppose. So if we are to complete the tower's trial, we should do as Meili suggested and go upstairs. Subaru, upstairs. So you said we are on the 3rd floor now, so the next floor up is the 2nd. As he said that, Subaru looked around the library, a room that he'd surveyed more than plenty, even when he hadn't actually walked around it. A room with nothing in it except bookshelves. Meaning there were no stairs that led up. Subaru, where is the staircase that leads to the 2nd floor? Julius, it's located on the 4th floor. There's a staircase there that leads up to the 2nd floor from there. Emilia sneaked a look towards Julius with a concerned look on her face. Seeing her, Julius knitted his eyebrows and said, "Worry not, Julius. I will not act rashly without consulting any of you like yesterday. It is as I promised at breakfast. However, even if I hadn't. Ram, Reed, the first sword saint, is a very tough opponent. Now then, what do you suppose we should do?" Julius and Ram exchanged bitter looks. It wasn't just those two that seemed to share this feeling, but everyone around him had a similar look on their faces. That is, other than Shola, who had grimaced like she put something in her mouth that wasn't just bitter but poisonous. Subaru. Ah, sorry. What do you mean, Reed? As usual, it was Natsuki Subaru that had been left behind in this situation. The first sword saint, Reed Astrea. That was the name of the man who guarded the second floor of the Pleiades watchtower as its examiner. In the first place, the title of Sword Saint was something Subaru had heard for his first time. However, when he had heard that he was of the first generation of this lineage, he got the premonition that this man could be likened to a powerful fictional character from his knowledge of these subcultures. His prediction was quite accurate. In fact, these sword saints, or whatever, were extremely powerful people, and such. It seemed that yesterday, the party that had challenged Reed had experienced the difference in strength between them, rather like the difference between an adult and a child. Amongst them, it was only Emilia who had achieved some sort of victory through both skill and luck. Subaru. The problem is that I've lost my memory, and I can't even do anything useful. At the breakfast table, where everyone had been trying to distract themselves from their uneasiness, he had tried to think of a novel idea to clear the tower with a bang. As far as he knew, the trial on the second floor seemed to require pure strength. In this situation, there was no place at all for his guile or knowledge of the modern world. Subaru. I guess scattering some flour about and attacking him with a dust explosion or something like that ain't gonna cut it. His strongest signature ability. Dust explosion. He would need to fine-tune quite a large amount of flour to activate it. In the first place, Subaru imagined there wouldn't be an abundant amount of flour lying around in this place where food was scarce. In fact, it was unknown to him whether there was any flour at all here. Subaru. Then I hope I can activate the secret cheat ability that I must have gotten from being summoned into this world. Subaru punched the wall next to him with his palm, yelling out a ha, in an attempt to see if he could activate it. There was no shockwave emitted from his palm, nor had the stone wall he had punched shattered into little pieces. The only thing he felt was the roughness against his palm and a somewhat hollow pang in his heart. Unfortunately, the secret cheat ability that had been given to Subaru seemed to not be related to great physical strength. In a last attempt, Subaru places his hands on the wall and kicks it with all his might. All that resulted was that he left a footprint on the place he had kicked the wall, as well as a stubbed toe. Subaru. Well, it must be magic. Beatrice, tell me how to use some magic. Beatrice, magic. Subaru can never use that ever again. Subaru, ever again. Why? Did I dabble into a forbidden spell or something? Beatrice, you used too much beginner's magic despite being told not to use it, and it broke your gate, I suppose. That's why you will never be able to use magic again, in fact. Subaru, it broke from using beginner's magic. So lame. Subaru had the urge to cry out to the heavens, having heard that he indeed had possessed magical powers, but could not use them any more to live life as a mage. And worst of all, it had been him casting beginner's magic that had destroyed his magical gate. Regardless of his loss of memories, Natsuki Subaru's life in a different world had started from the very bottom. Subaru, guess at least my saving grace is that I've been blessed with people. Clenching his hand into a fist, and then unclenching it, Subaru felt these emotions along with a profound sigh. Even if it was rather one-sided, it was relieving that there were people here who knew him. Without them, he would have been alone in this unknown world without any special abilities. To be honest, he did not think he was skillful enough to survive without any support. So finding himself here was a salvation, even if it had made someone's face sink. Subaru. Gulping, Subaru bent and stretched on the spot. He had checked the condition of his body, of his magic, and whether he had any special abilities. They were in some impromptu free time before they went up to the second floor. Whilst Emilia and the others were making the arrangements to challenge the walls of the second floor, Subaru was busying himself in checking whether his body had been endowed with any special abilities. After punching and kicking the wall, after being indignant about being told that his magical ability had ran dry, after running around the tower's insides, after thinking on how to test for special powers from various directions, Subaru had realized one thing, and that was Subaru. That maybe I haven't received anything. After sprinting through the hallway, while slightly out of breath, Subaru had accepted this fact. He felt like he possessed more physical strength than he did before. Even when he kicked the wall, he felt as if he was far more agile than he remembered. However, it was not to be confused for special powers. Rather, it would be more accurate to say that it's the same consequence of the scars on his body and his grotesque-looking arm. That is to say, it was probably due to what had happened during the year which Subaru could not remember. The only ability he possessed was the one where he was just an ordinary person who could not even respond to his parents' expectations. An ability on the levels that an ordinary person would have attained after suitable amount of endeavor. He couldn't feel the grace of special abilities granted to him by a so-called god there. Subaru. At first, I tried to do some transformation poses. He had tried super senshi poses, then Kamen rider poses, pretty cure poses, and even sailor senshi poses, but they had all been ineffective, meaning that in the end, he was a parallel world visitor who'd been thrown in here with nary a thing. Subaru. After all of that, my only hope is that my powers awaken when I am in trouble. Fuck. Scratching his head, Subaru bit down the seed of anxiety that was starting to grow in his heart. In front of Emilia and the others, he would have steeled himself and pretended that everything was okay. However, when looking at the situation anew, there was nothing but anxiety regarding Subaru's position. His memory was gone. There was no longer any doubt about it. There was too much evidence pointing towards it. And to be honest, he really wanted to believe it. He could not believe it and continue to stay in this place. He wanted to stay here. Here in this world, only here right now. So he wanted some powers to do that. Subaru. In the end, I have to depend on the bonds I have made with the people I don't remember. Makes me wanna cry. Natsuki Subaru, who was always mooching off stuff, did not have any changes to him, even in this parallel world. The more Emilia and the others showed how earnestly they were worried about Subaru, the more Subaru cursed himself for being blessed with his borrowed position. Subaru, it's not like when I go to the second floor I might be able to do anything there. That was why, in his heart, he had refused to be left behind. After they had explained to him about the guardian of the second floor, Redistria, they had argued whether to bring Subaru along to the trial. It had been Emilia who was the most concerned about bringing him along. Others were a bit reluctant, but had not protested as strongly as Emilia. Subaru, on the other hand, wished to accompany them. It seemed that they had thought that he would be unlikely to be of much help to them in conquering the second floor. They also mentioned that Reed Estria's temperament would be harmful towards him. Therefore, although if it had kept like that, Subaru was going to be left behind, he had Subaru. Still, I had insisted on going with them. The reason why they had tried to leave Subaru behind was because they were worried about him. Being treated so gently with concern, always on their mind, felt delightfully poisonous to him. If he had been the Natsuki Subaru with his memories intact, he was sure that he would have accompanied them, and that there would never have been such a discussion on whether he was coming or not. It would be unlikely that his amnesia would influence his abilities. In other words, except for the lack of knowledge, Subaru had thought he would be able to fight just like before he had lost his memories. Hence, he had tried one way or another to prove it to them, but in the end he hadn't gotten any results. Subaru. Although I asked Beatrice to leave me alone, from here on out the going's going to get tough. In seeing that Subaru was about to be left behind, he recalls Beatrice's sullen face. However, he had still asked her to leave him be after he had tried to ascertain whether his secret cheat ability was something physical, magical, or skill-based. After she had left, Subaru had tried out the transformation poses. After all, it would have been extremely embarrassing to test these poses in front of another person. Beatrice, of course, had been quite unyielding, and Subaru recalled how he had argued back and forth with her. Beatrice, when I leave you alone, you're gonna end up losing your memories. Nothing good will come of it. Betty will not move from here even with a lever, I suppose. Subaru, I am glad you feel that way. I'm totally grateful, but I'm about to do some stuff that I can't show to anyone. Beatrice, between Betty and Subaru, we don't need such distance. Subaru, no, I will be getting naked to put on my makeup by the moonlight. He had tried to break through to her with a brute force approach, zealously appealing her to leave the room. Eventually, seeing how nothing was working, they had managed to sort out things, with Beatrice receiving his strong appeal that he wouldn't do anything unnecessary and would without fail join back up with her. Subaru. Although it doesn't ring a bell, I was told I was her contractor on that point. It seemed like it was going well with Beatrice. Doesn't sound like me. Was that actually really me? Grimacing a little, Subaru pulled out the whip that had been holstered at his waist. He tried to hit the tip of it against the wall, but instead only succeeded in hitting his own leg. Subaru, Owa. I guess my body doesn't remember how to use it, or maybe I didn't master how to use it before I lost my memory. Having hit his own shin, Subaru's eyes began to tear up in pain as he rubbed it. In the first place, why had he chosen a whip as his weapon of choice? It was not a sword or a gun. Was he trying to be cool and unique, picking a whip as his weapon? Subaru, if I'd been able to use it, then I guess it must mean that it's not just the stuff inside of my head that's gone missing. While rubbing his shin, Subaru mulled this over as he knelt, his face twisting into a scowl at the chance that it really would not be salvageable. If his current reasoning was indeed correct, what was left for him here? He had lost his memories, made those he was supposed to accompany worry, lost everything he had worked towards, and became useless. Ultimately, with only history having been etched onto his body, and merely the outer shell was set in place. Guess he was just like papier-mâché. Subaru, huh? With a short sigh, Subaru got up. Those words that were floating in his brain were so silly that he wanted to guffaw at them. What are you going to do now, you papier-mâché? When wasn't Natsuki Subaru a papier-mâché? Subaru, I give up, I give up. I'm an idiot. Maybe I'm just unmotivating myself. Subaru brought his fist to his forehead in frustration and sighed again, bending over to pick up the fallen whip. He did not understand how to put it back to how it was. Struggling a bit, he finally managed to somehow put it back on his waist. As he did so, there he saw a blister on the palm of his hand, one that was different from those he got from swinging a kendo sword, one that made him feel the year that had gone by. For some reason, he traced it with his tongue. It felt tough. It felt bitter. Subaru, I wish I'd kept a diary for this occasion. This is no use. Subaru started to walk away from the scene, fuming at his past self in irrational anger. He couldn't confirm the presence of any secret cheat abilities, but in a sense he could say the fact he couldn't was a trove of information. With this in mind, he concluded that he shouldn't rely on something that did not exist. In a way, it was a little bit positive, but way more of a negative. Subaru. Well, this is not the right way. Subaru had gone the wrong way and found himself on another floor. In front of him was the large spiral staircase that leads to the lower floors of the tower. He had heard that the tower was made up of 6 floors. To go up from the 6th floor to the 4th floor, one would have to climb up the stairs, which went up for probably over 100s of meters high. Subaru. Thinking about it, the way this tower is structured is peculiar. It's like being in a fantasy world story now. It was a world where foliage can treat your injuries just by being within. Besides, in his original world, there had been some buildings which had seemed to be beyond human understanding. Pyramids were one example of such a phenomenon. If you think about it, then maybe there was not much of a difference between this tower and the pyramids. Subaru. I'm looking for things in common between this world and my original world. Did the past, me, do this too? Subaru began to feel ridiculous at having referred to himself as the past me. He felt as if he had slowly been going crazy ever since he'd lost his memories. In essence, there hadn't been a Subaru before, or a Subaru after losing his memories. The past and the present too, his self, was all one continuum. So here too, Natsuki Subaru was Subaru. Oh, Subaru shook his head, as if he was trying to shake off the thoughts that had clouded his mind. He let out a small sigh. It was truly a nonchalant sigh. He had let it out completely unintentionally, in spite of having received something much more unexpected. It was no more and no less than that. However, at the same time he had let out that sigh, he had felt a slight push on his back. Subaru. And as he let out that sigh, which was tantamount to no more than that, the world was flipped upside down. Subaru. His feet were off the ground. No, not just his feet, his whole body was. His whole body was overwhelmed by a feeling of weightlessness. He was falling down midair, losing sight of what was up or down. Engulfed by the sensation of weightlessness, Natsuki Subaru continues to fall. Subaru, wah! The sound of the wind whistled through his eardrums. He didn't get it. He didn't get anything. Right now, Subaru was falling. He was falling, spinning round and round in midair as he falls down headfirst. Falling, falling, falling. As he falls, his thoughts caught up to him, still falling. Subaru, wait. The world was spinning around his eyes. His limbs were flailing in midair. He does not know how many seconds had elapsed, but finally Subaru understood what had happened. Falling, he was falling. He was going to crash. He would hit the ground after falling down from above. He was swallowed by darkness as he fell past the spiral staircase. As he looked around desperately to all of his sides, Subaru could only see the tower's stone walls flowing past him. No, the walls were not flowing past him. It was Subaru's field of vision that was inverted as he fell down headfirst, so it was in fact him who was sweeping past them. The sensation of tumbling down caused him to retch, chunks of vomit flying out from him. Subaru. GHRKH Subaru couldn't even breathe. His throat was clogged with vomit. His nose stung, tears of pain were streaming out of him, and his organs felt like they were all in the wrong place. His whole body felt like a chaotic mess. His face, clothes, and surely the floor would have ended up flecked with vomit. Emilia would be shocked. Beatrice would get angry at him. Ram would just coldly stare at him. Julius would give him a tired sigh. Echidna would shrug her shoulders. Maylie would laugh. Shola would point at him. With such a feeling of frustration, Subaru had completely lost track of his own reality. Even if I search everywhere, I cannot find it. It's not up in the sky. It's not within me. Where did it go? Where is it? As well as his memory, Subaru had also lost himself. Subaru, Mami. Natsuki Subaru fainted just as that acrid mutter escaped from him. His consciousness halted, his thoughts were becoming fuzzy, and then, hard ground. Subaru. Hey, Subaru, are you okay? As he woke up, the first thing he heard was her chiming, silver bell voice. He could feel her breath near his face and her fingers on his arm. Sensing this, Subaru roused himself into consciousness and slowly opened his eyes. In front of him was a frighteningly good-looking fairy of the moon. Subaru, is this Emilia-chan? Emilia, oh Subaru, thank goodness. You woke up. I was really worried about you. Hearing Subaru speak, Emilia stroked her chest with a relieved look on her face. Subaru looked around the room in shock. He was in a room that was completely covered in ivy. Even the bed he was lying in was woven from ivy. The beautiful girl next to him, Emilia, was gently patting her chest in relief, and right next to her stood a drill lowly. Beatrice. Emilia, if you continue to be so gentle to him, Subaru will not reflect on his actions, I suppose. If you don't act tougher on him, he won't understand just how much he worried everyone. Emilia. That's right. Though Beatrice, why do you say it like that? Subaru was missing, so we hurried to find him. When we did, he was collapsed, and you were about to cry, Beatrice. It would be nice if you didn't say the unneeded, I suppose. Beatrice turned away from them, her face turning red in anger. Subaru, who was watching this exchange, looked on in confusion. Subaru, what? Was it a dream? At hearing Subaru say that, both Emilia and Beatrice turned towards him. Arc 6, Chapter 38. Who are you? All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray. Zero, starting a life in a different world from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop Yerek /u/Yerek, proofread by Furuta /u/Gracetopheard Shifty /u/Shifterfish 87 disclaimers. Note to anyone reading this, it's in the process of retranslation. This was one of my first ever TLS, and it's very poor quality, so I am trying to fix a lot of it. Subaru gazed around the room, not knowing what had happened to him. He could not comprehend a shred of the situation. Subaru. It was the room that he had gotten so used to seeing now, even if he would hesitate to call it familiar. The walls, floors, and ceiling were covered in ivy. Even the bed he had woken up in was woven with ivy. In front of him stood two girls, a beautiful lady and a beautiful little girl. Both were craning their necks to look at him. A huge lizard was kneeling down beside his bed. On the other bed within the room, a girl with blue hair and closed eyes was lying there. There was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. This was the green room of the Pleiades watchtower. Subaru. But why am I here again? Subaru didn't know if he had even woken up. With his hands on his head, Subaru recalled what had happened just before. They had talked about challenging the second floor trial whilst he had tried to confirm whether he possessed any special abilities. After all of that, Subaru had walked through the tower to join with Emilia, and the others after he had confirmed that he didn't possess any abilities. Subaru. What happened after that? His memory of what had happened afterwards was unclear. He had woken up on this bed all of a sudden. That impression had been strong. And whilst he fumbled to straighten his mind, a voice broke his train of thought. Emilia. Hey, Subaru, are you feeling okay? Subaru. Ooh, ah. Emilia-chan, you're so close. Emilia's beautiful face had suddenly popped up right next to his. She was so close to him that he could feel her breath against his face. In seeing her amethyst-colored eyes, bordered by long eyelashes, approaching out of nowhere, Subaru scooted back to the opposite side of his bed. Emilia's eyes widened in surprise at his overreaction. Emilia, you don't have to look so scared. Besides, it was me who had been scared earlier. Subaru. Scared. Beatrice. Certainly. We thought that you had disappeared. We searched for you and found you collapsed, I suppose. It would be improper to not be worried. Subaru. Seriously. I collapsed again. Beatrice crossed her arms and snorted in exasperation. Subaru was caught by surprise by her words. He stood up and patted his body to make sure it was okay. Yet he couldn't feel any abnormalities. Though it was dubious whether he would notice any differences considering his amnesia, there were no obvious signs of trauma. Subaru, still, it's pretty dangerous to collapse twice in such a short time. Although it has only been a couple of hours, should I feel lucky that my memories weren't blown away again? Beatrice, what are you grumbling about? Subaru should have something to say to Betty and Emilia, I suppose. Subaru, something to say. Beatrice threw these words at him as he was staring at his outstretched arms. Subaru turned around to see both Emilia and Beatrice staring at him. He was a little bit worried about what would he have to tell these two individuals. Subaru, well, I'm sorry. I apologize for worrying you all. You both saved me again. Beatrice, you're doing fine so far. Emilia, you are most welcome, but I am quite glad that nothing happened to you. I'm so relieved. Subaru, yes. I'm sorry to Emilia-chan. It's inexcusable for me to cause you so much trouble all the time. Raising his hand in apology, Subaru expresses his gratitude towards Emilia. However, when Emilia heard Subaru's words, she furrowed her shapely eyebrows. Her amethyst eyes looked positively bewildered. Emilia, wait. Subaru, what happened just then? Subaru, what happened? That's a vague question. What's the issue? Emilia, well, just now you called me Emilia-chan. Somehow, being called that makes me feel a little bit uneasy. While saying this, Emilia began to fiddle with her long silver hair as she nervously looked at Subaru. Her gaze seemed to be filled with loneliness. Subaru involuntarily let out an internal yelp. Open and friendly, her appearance had struck Subaru's taste. However, in regards to her current emotions, Subaru felt like there was a deep gap between them. Beatrice, Subaru's pranks are starting up again now, I suppose. More importantly, Beatrice's mood was starting to get worse after hearing the exchange of those two. Shaking her splendid drills, she snapped her fingers at Subaru, and with a puff of her red cheeks, she said, Beatrice, I want you to tell Betty and Emilia now. Why did you go to the Taygeta library last night, I suppose? Why did you collapse there? Subaru, wait, what? I collapsed again in Taygeta. Beatrice, again. Subaru, seriously, Taygeta is such a dreadful place. I don't know what I was doing there again. After all, it's a place with such a shady history. It was reckless of me, I guess. Subaru had been told of an incident which his own memory did not recall. He was bewildered by this fact and started to feel a little bit unsettled. For sure, he could not recall anything before and after he had slipped out of consciousness. Still, there should be no reason for him to have visited Taygeta again. Rather, it's more likely that someone must have found him collapsed elsewhere in the tower and brought him to Taygeta, though he didn't see what the point of that would be. Beatrice, wait, I suppose. Subaru. However, Beatrice had told him to wait up as he began to feel confused. Subaru, yeah, Beatrice. Somehow I think we're not on the same wavelength. Subaru, tell us the story accurately, I suppose. Subaru, accurately? What do you mean? Beatrice, try telling us about the situation you're in right now. Patiently, Beatrice slowly spelled this out to Subaru. He nodded his head as he sensed the intimidation in her tone as she spoke those heavy words. And whilst Emilia looked at him with a worried expression on her face, Subaru strained his memory in thought. Subaru, well, I think I told you. When I woke up, I had no memories, though it doesn't mean that they are completely empty. My memories since being summoned to this parallel world are Beatrice, wait. Memories. What do you mean by memories, I suppose? Subaru, ha. Beatrice's usually dignified manner was abruptly shattered as Subaru had begun his explanation. He was surprised by her unexpected reaction. Emilia had placed her hand on the panicked Beatrice's shoulder to steady her. But Emilia wasn't calm either. She was also looking at Subaru in astonishment. Emilia, Subaru, I am sorry. I don't know what you're saying. Subaru, no, I'd feel bothered if I stop here. I have you two here. He was supposed to know what to say next. He tried to continue, but his words trailed off. Both Emilia and Beatrice looked at Subaru with sheer bewilderment in their eyes. It was plain to him that they were not acting, and because he thought they were not acting, that made it all the more terrifying to him. Why were they forgetting about when he had told them about his amnesia? Surely the tower hadn't sucked up the memories of those other than Subaru. A terrifying thought rose to his mind. Namely, this tower was an awful one, sucking out everyone's memories to some degree, making conversation impossible. Then Subaru realized. Subaru, when I woke up, and when talking to those two, and on top of that, he may have remembered something. No, not may have. He had definitely remembered something. The first time he had met Emilia and Beatrice, when he was told he had lost his memories, the conversation had sounded exactly like the one now. To put it more plainly, waking up in the green room, lying on the ivy bed, was that not a carbon copy of the situation earlier when he was told he had lost his memories? Subaru. Thinking about this fact, Subaru gulped loudly. If you look at Emilia and Beatrice, both of their behaviors had not changed. However, it is not from distrust that they were glancing at Subaru in sheer bewilderment. Rather, it's from concern in their heart towards Subaru. The fact that there was no deception in their gazes made Subaru feel much more calm at heart. In all honesty, Subaru's heart had been undulating under great turmoil. But having made this guess at the current situation, Subaru, I am seeing the same events again. I must be experiencing precognitive dreams. Given his situation when he woke up, is it not reasonable to think this? If so, when he had lost consciousness, should he rather say that he had woke up? In that moment just before he woke up, his memories had been incredibly hazy. Dreams did, for some reason, slip through the cracks between one's fingers when trying to keep them jumbled together. Or maybe these precognitive dreams were a special ability Subaru was given when summoned into this world, Subaru. It's difficult to make use of, it's a pretty selective ability. However, there's no doubt that if he could master it, then it would be quite a potent ability. In the end, a precognitive dream would let him foresee the future. The longer it would show him the truth for, the greater chance of finding a clue to overcome the situation. Unfortunately, he did not think that he got much useful information out of this precognitive dream, Subaru. You too, I need you to calm down just a little and hear what I have to say. Sitting up straight, Subaru now had an understanding of the ability he possessed. He turned towards them and said that. Emilia and Beatrice both look at Subaru and nod, with serious expressions on their faces. Looking towards them, Subaru said with a slight hint of hesitation, Subaru, I don't know if you can believe this, but I seem to have lost my memories. Subaru had awakened at the Tegeta library and lost his memories. It took as much time as it had in the precognitive dream for Emilia and Beatrice to digest what he had confessed. Emilia, airy. With an air-splitting sound, the girl slammed her palms onto her own cheeks with all her strength. Her anxious eyes widened up in pain, and at the shock, as she motivated herself with an all right, it was a brave, almost manly way of accepting it, something he had also seen in his precognitive dream. Emilia, I'm fine. Being like that is no good, is it? How could we keep making that troubled face when Subaru must be feeling even more troubled than we are? Look, Beatrice too. Having rallied her strength with a vigorous speech, Emilia shook Beatrice's shoulder. In front of Emilia's geared-up presence, Beatrice looked at her, unable to hide her confusion. Emilia, I'm shocked too, and I also understand the sadness, but right now, we have to think about the one who's taking this the hardest. We have to do something for him, don't we? Beatrice, be Betty is, Beatrice. One Subaru fought back a pang in his chest as he watches Beatrice struggle to get her words out. Subaru knew exactly what Beatrice would say and what sort of face she would make. But he was quite wrong in thinking that it would bring him some peace of mind. Having to betray someone's feeling of hopes was tough, Rather, it was terrifying. No matter how many times he had to do it, regardless whether it was the same problem for the second time, it was all the same. And now, Subaru knew Beatrice much better than the first time he met her. That was why it was tougher for Subaru than the first time. Beatrice. Ugh, just really. Subaru is just the most hopeless contractor in the world. With that said, Beatrice broke through her embarrassment. The pattern of the butterfly wings that adorned her irises started to flutter in her eyes. While he was relieved by that, Subaru felt a strong sense of self-hatred. Was this right? Was he satisfied with this? Yeah, Natsuki Subaru. Could he really erect a castle upon the sand, on top of the bonds and faith he'd already built up? Subaru gritted his teeth together as he saw Emilia and Beatrice's heart-wrenching, albeit gentle, determination. Subaru had not confided to them that he was able to experience precognitive dreams. The conversation after he woke up, and with remembering their names, he pushed the fact that not all of his memories had fallen out. In fact, besides his memory loss, of course, Subaru's report had also been about the allocation of his missing memories. He couldn't afford to doubt the two people with him, and furthermore, Subaru himself didn't want to engage in any unproductive conversation. Above all else, he wanted to figure out how far his precognitive dreams would show the truth correctly for. For this reason, he did not want to create a situation which would deviate from what his precognitive dream had shown him. Although some changes had occurred at the start, they were not anything too big. However, this was not the only reason that he did not mention his precognitive dreams. Subaru. Neither Emilia, Beatrice, Ram, Julius, Echidna, nor even anyone had explained to Subaru that he had this precognitive dreams ability. Shola and Meili also hadn't. It's difficult to imagine that they intentionally hid it from Subaru. Even under the prior circumstances, it's difficult to believe that they all had the same intention. It made no sense. Then it was inevitable that there was only one reason why they wouldn't know of his precognitive dreams. That is, Natsuki Subaru had never revealed to them his ability. Subaru. What were you thinking, Natsuki Subaru? Subaru calls his name out as if he was referring to a different person. No, saying as if he was referring to a different person was wrong. It was a different person. To Subaru, Natsuki Subaru is an unknown person who doesn't exist. Can't guess what he is thinking and he can't interact with him. There would be no chance of getting to understand him. Why did Subaru not tell Emilia et al. About his power? Was it because he didn't want to change the development of these precognitive dreams as much as possible? Even if it was due to that, surely once the situation had been overcome, there would have been time to confide this. Was there a reason why he couldn't say it? A distrust of the old Subaru was steadily growing within him. Subaru, what were you thinking, Natsuki Subaru? After that, the events took place as expected, roughly following what he had seen in his precognitive dreams. Emilia, so I guess everyone is pretty shocked. Subaru is in quite a situation right now. But even in a situation like this, no, precisely because the situation is like this, we should give him our support. Emilia explains to the others how Subaru has lost his memories. Although it wasn't the greatest of explanations, it was now impossible to make a follow-up in case he drastically changed the events. Thus, in place of Emilia, who sucked with words, Beatrice ended up taking on the struggle. And then, Ram. Is this some kind of prank, Barusu? Ram had suspected that Subaru's situation might have been a prank. Shola. Say, Master, you're still not tired of playing around like this. Just how many times do you have to forget me before you cut that out? Shola had indifferently accepted that he had lost his memories, as if she thought it was something that couldn't be helped, Meili. Really, Oniisen sure looks like really troubled, doesn't he, whether disinterested or not? Meili smiled at the prank, as if enjoying the atmosphere of confusion, Echidna. Just, let's give him a little time to settle down. That's fine, right? Worried about Julius, as he became extremely upset at hearing that Subaru had lost his memories. Soon after, Echidna suggested for them to take a brief interval to collect their thoughts. He accepted Ram's invitation and left the room to fetch some water. Then when they were alone with just the two of them, Ram grabbed Subaru by his collar and pushes him against the wall. Ram, please, spit it out. He'd parted with some of his saintliness. However, that's not to say that he wasn't shook to the core. After hearing Ram's quiet sobs, Subaru returned back to where everyone was with this conviction. The precognitive dreams are accurate. They are terribly accurate and foreshadow the events completely. Subaru didn't know everything they would say and do, but the impression that they had given was pretty much unchanged. If there was a problem, Echidna, Natsuki-kun is quite calm despite the situation. Reintroducing each other, and both revealing their bombshells, with that Anastasia's consciousness was currently overwritten by Echidna's. Echidna said that to Subaru. Subaru. Subaru felt his mouth dry up after hearing Echidna's words. To be honest, Echidna's observation was understandable. Subaru himself couldn't really do much about it. Everyone was shocked and in a state of panic. Still, whilst seeing her trying to smooth over the absurd situation, he couldn't help but not feel much empathy from within his heart for them. It's like when you watch a movie for a second time. The emotions you experience are not as strong as the first time you watch it. That which he felt even stronger was a flurry of negative emotions, namely sympathy towards them for putting on such a brave face, guilt for leaving them as is despite knowing that, and a feeling of revulsion towards Subaru, who'd probably continued to do such. It was no wonder that Subaru bore a dark expression on his face coupled with a taciturn attitude, even though they had thought that was him remaining calm. In any case, Subaru, I am happy that things have settled down. I was the type of kid who'd always get, he never settles down, written down in his report card. Echidna, report card, I don't really understand that that means. Is that something of the parallel world? Subaru, yeah. Narrowing his eyes, Subaru nods his head at Echidna's question. The way he answered the question about the meaning of parallel world did not change again. He explained how he was summoned to this different world and found himself in this place. And the same understanding came from Emilia, Echidna, and the others, who concluded that he originated from beyond the great waterfall. Perhaps, even if he could not fully reproduce the events of his precognitive dreams, events that hold some sense of importance would still be realized with some slight changes to them. It's something typically found in Subaru's future prediction line of games and manga. Though the response to a sudden situation may change, what you decide to do doesn't disappear so easily. A person who has decided to ask someone out on a date goes and asks the person out in a completely different way than before, where there now are some notable obstacles in the way. That is the feeling he is getting from this. In other words, Echidna was going to ask about the different world, regardless of whether he had lost his memories. Subaru, even though I didn't explain it up till now, was I still careless in mentioning the word parallel world? I don't even know what to think anymore. Due to the nature of his precognitive dreams, confiding his ability was difficult, and rather than that, it was incredibly strange that he hadn't talked about the different world. It was almost like he'd just given up, deeming it pointless to confide it, as if he were afraid to. Echidna, after all, it's odd that you sound the least confused amongst us. We're all growing uneasy here, thinking we must do something about it. Subaru. Maybe this is what they mean when they all talk about everyone being in a panic, but the person in question instead grows calm. Even I'm nervous, thinking we ought to do something about it. So rest assured there. Emilia, I feel like we can't feel relieved with that at all. Both Echidna and Subaru shrugged their shoulders at each other. Emilia's looked quite dispirited as she spoke those words. The mood was somehow still hitting rock bottom. After all, Subaru's attitude was growing. He had tried to mimic his precognitive dream as much as possible. However, how attempts at mimicking his attitude had been quite poor. It was very difficult to imitate the confused self he had seen in his dream. So before he spouts out additional nonsense, Subaru. Anyways, I understand the situation we are in. I know that there's a lot of confusion, but let's overcome it together. Let's do something about it. Clapping his hands together, Subaru tried to progress the conversation ahead. Beatrice nodded in response, and as if obeying the precognitive dream, she said, Beatrice, you will want to check the Taygeta library, I suppose. Shawla, Yuye Tilda with a loose-lipped smile, the glamorous, beautiful woman let out a shriek. If she would just straighten herself out and start to look more dignified, her beauty would surely captivate the hearts of many men. Her face relaxed, though, as she tried to snuggle into Subaru. Shawla, master, I'm happy, Tilda. I swear I'll make you happy. Subaru, hey, don't say that. Don't hug my arm. You're frighteningly soft. Shola, I just want to have it so those means parts to you are smushed, you know. Subaru continued to push her away by her forehead, while Shola tried to desperately cling onto his arms. In all honesty, being clung onto by a beautiful woman who from the start took on a tempting appearance was a sense of distance that he wanted to restrain himself from, both in terms of Subaru's strength as a human and as a boy. Subaru and the others had arrived now at the 3RD floor of the watchtower, where the TAPPEI library was. As it had been in his dream, they would search the library in an attempt to find out how Subaru had lost his memories, and if possible, get them back. However, Subaru knows that their search will be ineffective and that they will bring back no results. It was going to be an irritating time for him now, since he was not allowed to participate in the search. Though to him, it looked like Shola was acting way too overfamiliar than his dream had shown. Shola. After all, Master, you chose us over that Chibako, didn't you? Subaru. It's not like I specifically chose it. Due to what's happening, I couldn't help but be stuck with you. Shola spoke this with a ditzy expression, talking about their approach to Taygeta. Although the distance to the library was not long, Subaru had arranged it so that he wouldn't have to hold hands with Emilia and Beatrice. His intention behind it had been out of pangs of conscience towards Beatrice and Emilia. Given that he knew what was going to happen thanks to his precognitive dream, he didn't reveal the fact that it was probably going to be a waste of time. And putting it like that, with a bird's eye view of the situations, Subaru treat the two girls like so. Therefore, he was now sitting next to the airheaded Shola whilst waiting for the party to finish searching Taygeta. Shola, finally, Master recognized how charming and attractive I am. I had to wait 400 years for this. I'm so happy, I'm so happy. I will give you such a passionate kiss. Subaru, that's not what I was implying. That's scary. Really, stop it. Shola was pressing her body down onto his. Subaru tried desperately to push her off, but she had unusual strength, and thus he found himself pinned against a wall. This wasn't even a cabe-don, it was a cabe-gower. That's how intense it was. And just before the virginity of Subaru's lips, which had never experienced the love of a woman, was forcefully taken away, Meili. Hey, Oni-san seems to dislike this. Quit fooling about. Shola, ow, 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 ow. It had been Meili who had dragged Shola off him by pulling her back by her ponytail. Shola twisted her neck, took back her ponytail from her, and carefully cradled her long, black hair against her chest. Shola, what did you do to my hair? What did you do to my precious hair, you horrible little GL? Meili, I don't want my silver-haired One-san or Beatrice Jan to be angry. I was keeping watch to make sure that my half-naked One-san didn't do anything bad to my Oni-san. Shola, GRRRRR, so annoying. Master, please do something. Subaru, Shola, don't you dare come within 2 meters of me. You're scary. Shola, Master's such an idiot. Shola turned her back from Subaru, feigning a breakdown to tears. Subaru scratched his cheeks in confusion as he looked on at her exposed back. Then he turns around to face Meili, who was holding her hands behind her back. Subaru, you were a great help. Now that's a strange thing to say to a killer. Meili, don't worry. This killer has gone out of business. Now I do what Oni-san, One-san and her friends tell me. Oni-san and the others can make good use of me, like when I help out with the wicked animals. Subaru. She spoke with no malice or ulterior motive. That's why Subaru didn't react to her words. Meili did not seem to be especially affected by any particular pangs of conscience as she spoke. Those were difference between the values of his world and this one. Meili. She said nothing in response to Subaru's silence. She just looked at him silently with an unfathomable expression on her face. Meili now turned to gaze indifferently at the direction which Emilia was searching the library. The girl was quite short, had a youthful face, her arms and legs were still tiny, and there was still quite a way to go before she reached womanhood. In the end, she was still a child. It was unbearable to him that she held such broken values about herself. Subaru, maybe, even in you there's still plenty we can rely on, so I'm counting on you. Meili, so this is what you're saying. Make good use of me. Subaru, no, not use. Rely. We're not tools that can be just used. Think of it like a friendship. Meili, HMMPH. For a second, Meili had regarded Subaru's words in shock. Though it had only been for a fleeting moment, she had quickly averted her eyes afterwards. Subaru was relieved that she had not reacted in discomfort. Rather, it had seemed like a faint glimmer of comfort had flitted across her face. Even if within her heart she held broken values about herself, it didn't mean that everything she could feel would end up being out of sync from that which Subaru knew. The fact that they both could compromise about these unknown circumstances made Subaru feel a little bit better. Meili. Oni-san really doesn't remember anything, right? Subaru. Yup. Unfortunately, was something on your mind? He had unexpectedly shaken something about his memories from Meili. Subaru tried to ask her what she had meant by it. Hearing his question, Meili just put her fingers to her lips and gave a very sweet smile. Oh yeah, Meili, Petra-chan would cry if she heard it. Subaru. Ah, I don't even know who that is. Meili, Petra-chan is a girl that loves Oni-san. She was worried about you going all the way out here. It felt almost like I could hear her say, "Look, I knew it." Subaru. God damn that me from yesterday. What thoughtless things he did. Subaru looked on bitterly, thinking in distress about this young girl, Petra, that he had not yet seen. How much would he end up learning about the footprints that the Subaru, unknown to him, had left? Meili. Really, I honestly think that my opinion of Oni-san from yesterday is that he was quite careless as well. Meili was stretching as she said this, ignoring the turmoil she had left in Subaru's heart. In his mind, it had sounded like what she had said had been accompanied by a very strange emotion. In any case, Emilia and the others would come back before he could quickly confirm it. If they had found no clues, it would only reinforce how accurate his predictive dream had been. Since the search of Taygeta ended with no success, they would now prepare to go up to the second floor. Ultimately, from now on the scope of the precognitive dreams would stop around about here. Subaru had until now not doubted the accuracy in his future prediction ability at all. The events had transitioned just as Subaru had experienced them before. If any issues were to occur at this point, he would not be able to respond by using his knowledge of the future that his precognitive dreams had shown. Subaru, I am able to predict the future. Isn't it insane that I managed to confirm it? However, it was also strange. In the first place, Subaru didn't know what conditions were needed to activate his precognitive dreams. If he fell asleep, would it activate, or did it need some sort of trigger, or was it just completely random? It would be unlikely that there would be time to find a place to sleep due to the urgency of the current situation. However, he wanted to depend on the power of his foresight. Certainly, he would need to find out more details about this. He would need to investigate thoroughly what he could do with his foresight. Subaru. For now, just as in my dream, I managed to force Beatrice to leave me alone. But Subaru had asked Beatrice to leave him alone as he tried out via trial and error the transformation poses. It had seemed that Beatrice had been trying to remain more attached to him than he had seen in his dreams. That was probably as a consequence of being around her less than he had been in his dreams, such as on the way to Taygeta. In any case, he had a reason for being alone. Subaru, I have to find out why I woke up and what happened to me just before I woke up. It may be that he just happened to wake up normally. However, it could also be that there was something within his dream that had caused him to wake up. Something like encountering a horrible experience or a painful one. Subaru, I'm a little freaked out right now. What if I start to have precognitive dreamception? It's spooky. It's like as if I was dreaming of being a butterfly. 3. Dreaming of being a butterfly is the situation where you dream of physically being a butterfly. But when you awake, you aren't really sure whether you are a butterfly dreaming of being a person or a person having dreamt of being a butterfly. It felt like it would become a vicious, never-ending loop, like a self-fulfilling prophecy that would drive the footholds of his own self to a corner of uncertainty as something unreliable. Subaru. In order to avoid this, I need to go past where my dream ended. If I can do that, then I should be able to tell Emilia and the others about my precognitive dreams. The Subaru, before losing his memories, had unfortunately avoided confiding his ability to Emilia and the others. However, Subaru now was anxious to change this situation and confide to everyone what he could do. He didn't know what would become if he were to do such a careless thing. Frightened by this anxiety, he didn't want to bring a situation about where he'd delay it now. Subaru, I have decided. Looking back to reevaluate his position, Subaru had finally decided that he would tell them about his precognitive dreams. Nonetheless, what was coming up ahead was an unknown to him. After the point at which Beatrice had left, his memories, including those of having performed the transformation poses, were quite fuzzy. Therefore, showing proof that he could experience precognitive dreams would be quite difficult to do. In addition, he didn't know how to activate them. He would need them to cooperate with him when he tried to explain his ability. If he could master his dreams, it would become an extremely powerful weapon at his disposal. Or perhaps it was a necessary weapon that would allow them to conquer the Pleiades watchtower. With these thoughts in mind, as for Natsuki-kan, is it not dangerous for him to accompany us in the crazed state he's in right now? Asterisk in the distance. Having arrived in front of the hall in an attempt to join everyone, Subaru held his breath at hearing those words. The intelligent voice he had heard was Echidna's. For some reason in his mind, Subaru had hesitated to announce his presence and had decided to hide behind the wall. The conversation in the hall continued. Emilia, Echidna, what do you mean by dangerous? Echidna, there's nothing else to say, right? Considering the state he's in right now, it certainly has lost his memories. However, what he said afterwards was truly crazed. The way he explained the term parallel world is proof. Emilia, parallel world. Julius, you don't truly believe he came from beyond the great waterfall. Julius and Emilia seemed shocked at hearing Echidna's words. Subaru's heart lurched. What did Echidna's remarks mean now? He wanted to jump out from his hiding spot and ask her, but for now he would suppress that emotion. Even if Subaru didn't ask, surely someone else would, Ram. It was certainly an absurd explanation. Emilia, Ram, you too doubt what Subaru said. Emilia reacted in surprise at Ram's cold, indifferent tone. In response to her question, Ram said, Emilia-sama, Ram, it's not like I doubt Barusu's argument from the start. Indeed, Barusu's knowledge, behavior, and strange customs are things which are unknown to us. It is clear that he may indeed come from a place which none of us here know about. Emilia, well, in that case, Ram, but where he came from, it's limited to this world. I am sure being from beyond the great waterfall could be tailored to mean Barusu's term, parallel world, but I can't believe the existence of such a place. There is no reason to believe him now at all anymore. Emilia, Ram. Emilia's voice faintly trailed away as she heard Ram's explanation, which felt like she was enduring bitterness in it. But there was no reply. Emilia quietly cleared her throat. Emilia, I believe in Subaru, Beatrice too, so please, please try to believe what Subaru said. Julius, Emilia-sama, Echidna is not suggesting that Subaru is trying to deceive us on purpose. She is just saying that he's in a terrible state of confusion. Beatrice, in that statement, you still agree with that spirit, I suppose. Julius tries to rationally explain their thoughts to Emilia. However, Beatrice was having none of it, as she was intent on remaining on Subaru's side in this matter. Her temper had flared considerably. At that moment, an unnerving silence had fallen within the room. Subaru's forehead had started to sweat. Shala, it's best if you all quit fighting and settle down. Even if y'all are at each other's throats arguing here, right now, Master's not here, so no way he's gonna be pleased. Meili, I don't think it's quite a discussion on that scale yet. But what, yeah, right. He heard the voices of Shala and Meili, who were still seemed to be bystanders. Laughing rather superciliously for a short while, Meili continued her speech with, Going crazy, Meili. Why don't you ask Oni-san directly? Oni-san, are you going crazy? Subaru. HK Subaru gritted his teeth to those venomous words. He had remained surprisingly calm when he had stood against the wall. He carefully left the room without making any footsteps. After putting some distance between them, his prudent footsteps quickened in pace, which then turned into a run. Then, arriving at a passageway where no one was present, he pressed his forehead against the wall. Subaru, damn it. Not knowing what he should say to whom, Subaru struck the wall, letting out the feelings that were smoldering inside him. The discussion that had taken place in Subaru's absence was an unexpected shock to him. He wasn't conceited enough to think that he had gained their full confidence. Rather, he could safely say that such a point hadn't been in his thoughts. Subaru had thought that trust was such a basic pre-principle. Emilia and Beatrice had been too kind and thoughtful towards Subaru. Whilst insisting to himself that it had felt far too uncomfortable, he had tricked himself into believing that it was true. There was no doubt that being from a different place would have helped them conquer from the tower. With the handicap of losing his memories and his calm and collected thoughts, he had lost all his usefulness. Looking at it objectively, he realized just how shameless he was. What was trust in this tower in the desert? He himself couldn't understand it much. He wondered if he could ever handle what Natsuki Subaru had gained. Subaru, in this state, it's no use telling them about my precognitive dreams. The fact that they believed in his memory loss was proof of these people's virtue. At the same time, however, they were sensible people who did not believe in a different world. Therefore, he didn't even have to think about what response and explanation of his precognitive dreams would provoke. Subaru. From the start, I bungled it up. Messed up. He had messed up. In the meanwhile, how would Subaru overturn their evaluations of him, showing that he could be dependable at this point? What was sought now, what was needed now was Natsuki Subaru, not Natsuki Subaru. Was it all right if he feigned ignorance and went back down to them? Also, in a state which he didn't know what kind of exchange had taken place, would it be okay if he shamelessly joined the capture of the second floor? Or would Emilia and Beatrice veto that and have him left behind? And who would be keeping an eye on him there? At least he'd like to hope for Scholler or Meili, given that conversation with them was no issue. Subaru. Fuck, I'm such an idiot. While saying those words out loud, Subaru abruptly came out of the passageway he was walking through. He had come across the great spiral staircase which connected the fourth floor to the floors below. A gaping hole stretched out from the middle of the watchtower to its lower half. It was truly colossal. Subaru, spiral, staircase. Suddenly, laying his eyes on that scene, Subaru started to ponder. Including his dreams, this was his second time he had come here. Both in dream and reality, Emilia and everyone else had guided the amnesiac Subaru around the tower. So recognizing this place was not a mistake, but Subaru. No, apart than that, I feel something strange. Goosebumps coursed down his body. He felt the hairs on his back stand on end. The blood in his whole body felt cold, and the ringing in his ears was awfully loud. His heartbeat had accelerated, his breathing became rough, and his knees began trembling for whatever reason. His teeth had begun making an uncontrollable chattering noise. Subaru became aware of these abnormalities. However, they were not caused due to any changes in temperature or any external causes. This abnormality, this unusual phenomenon, had been caused by Subaru's own body. To say more about it, the influence on his body was as if it was Subaru's spirit or something from a deeper place, Subaru. Ah! With a faint tap, Subaru felt a slight impact just as he was stepping forward. No, it couldn't be said that he stepped forward. To step forward is a term which presumes there is some solid ground which can be stepped on. Stepping ahead, his leg had come out, and his foot had scratched the air. And so he, Subaru, falling, he was plummeting. His whole body was overwhelmed by a feeling of weightlessness. He was falling down midair, losing sight of what was up or down. A tremendous gust of wind was hitting his eardrums. Subaru understood what was happening. He was falling. No, there had been a light impact back then, but that didn't necessarily indicate that he'd fallen. He'd been pushed down. Subaru. Ah, 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 ah. Screaming his lungs out, Subaru desperately stretched out his hands, searching for somewhere, anywhere to hold on to. There was nothing. There was nowhere he could hold on to. The world around him was spinning around so much that he couldn't comprehend the world around him. A desperate feeling of wanting to vomit overpowers him as all the contents of his body are pulled from bottom to top. Chunks of yellow vomit overflows from his mouth, spilling out right into the air around him. This sensation, he remembered it. In the midst of his pain and vomiting, the memories that had once been ambiguous had suddenly sharpened. Yes, that was it. Before he had woken up, the end of his precognitive dream, Subaru had been experiencing the same thing. He had fallen, lamented his futile situation, and then he had lost consciousness. And after that, he had woken up from his precognitive dream and found himself in the green room. Suddenly, Subaru experiences a great impact on the right side of his body, shattering his bones into pieces. Crack asterisk. The sound of something breaking filled the air. His right side felt like it had been hit by lightning. Subaru's cries were silenced. And right after, even if a bit belated, a severe pain coursed through his body. Subaru, Jaya. His right arm was sticking out at an odd angle, completely broken from the elbow with the bone protruding out from his skin. He was covered in blood, his jacket was torn, and he could see his own pinkish muscles and white bone from underneath his torn skin. He crashed. Subaru's body crashed against the spiral staircase whilst he fell down towards the bottom. As it is now, his uncontrolled spiraling descent would end up destroying Subaru's body, and still he didn't stop. No, it was far worse. Subaru, who? His body that had tumbled downwards and had struck one of the lower steps of the spiral staircase, spraying blood everywhere. It was bad luck that his head hit the next step. His forehead cracked. He felt as if things were spilling out from the insides of his skull. Instantly, he lost consciousness. Where it seemed like it had all ended, his body collided with another step, and the pain from his broken right arm woke him up as his body continued to lose its shape. Subaru. Jaya. It hurts, 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 it hurts. Pain, anguish, vomiting, burning, Natsuki Subaru was being shattered into small pieces. Arms, feet, face, every part of him was thrown and scraped against the stone staircase, broken, crushed, making it so he no longer resembled a person. No longer a person, into something that no longer was Natsuki Subaru. Memories are what shape people. Subaru, blurb whilst spattering out a vast amount of blood, Subaru suddenly heard this voice. Who had said such a silly thing, saying it like they understood him? But it was a good thing to say. Memories are what shape people. It was a good saying. If so, what the hell does that make someone who's lost his memories and is no longer who he once was? Subaru. Blood was spewing out of his mouth. Quite literally, a scream that spewed blood. His throat was completely crushed. Natsuki Subaru was falling apart, crumbling away until he reached the distant, distant ground. There is no waking up from this dream. Natsuki Subaru had failed. There would be no more second chances to try again. The end drew near. Slowly, darkness, darkness. The world around him was being dyed black. Who are you? And finally, after all of his anguish and hot blood, Natsuki Subaru's crumbled out of existence. 3 seems to be referencing this Chinese famous saying, https://n, wikiquote, org/wiki/zhuangzi. Arc 6, Chapter 39, Ruins. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray. Zero, starting a life in a different world from zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop Yerek /u/Yerek, proofread by Furuta /u/Graced Harperd Archbishop Archbishop 17 fan art created by Ori, Twitter deleted disclaimers. Note to anyone reading this, it's in the process of retranslation. This was one of my first ever TLS, and it's very poor quality, so I am trying to fix a lot of it. View here, repeatedly, over and over, a scorching heat filled his very being. His skull, his limbs, his torso, his organs, his flesh and blood. Every single thing in his body was crushed, smashed, twisted and broken. His mind was set alight by the anguish. It was as if every single one of his nerve endings were being plucked right now, his soul on fire, burning away. The screams he let out were racked with unimaginable fever and a sense of loss. Pain, 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 pain. He is in pain. There was only pain. There was just pain. The world around him was filled with pain. Even just thinking this caused more pain to cloud over him. His thoughts, his very existence were painted with pain. Anxiety, confusion, nervousness, sorrow, anger, despair, all of these emotions were meaningless in front of pain. They were meaningless, yes, they were meaningless. Thoughts, actions, pondering, opinions, hopes, memories, they were all equally meaningless. When it came to those things which were the very embodiment of worthlessness, what was there to value when they were crushed, smashed, and lost in the end? Only the endless pain inscribed within his soul makes him aware of his existence. Then suddenly, the never-ending pain started to fade. Subaru. He woke up screaming. Right now, even the fact that his screaming throat had been crushed, drowned amidst welling blood, was not but a memory. Subaru. Whilst shouting, he tried to protect his body from being crushed using his arms and legs. His arms should be broken, completely unusable, yet they moved. Although they moved, he lost his balance as his body was still overwhelmed by the sensation of weightlessness, and he fell and hit the floor. Subaru. He tried to speak, yet nothing resembling speech came out. He rolled onto the floor. The feeling of the floor was strange. He felt a sensation which was like that one of a rope against his body. He opened his throat, which was screaming for oxygen, and immediately felt a pungent pain strike it, resulting in a coughing fit. Unable to bear it, he vomited. His stomach had been mostly empty. Foul-smelling, watery chunks of vomit were spewed out of his acrid mouth onto the floor. Subaru, blurg, bgh, ghrgh, g-brug. Coughing violently and spitting out a bit of bile, tears and snot caked his crumpled face. Cowering and covering his face, he feebly smacked his forehead against the floor over and over again. Repeating this motion, he finally noticed it. That overwhelming pain which he had suffered as his body had been crushed had vanished. Subaru. He had been surprised by how suddenly his pain had vanished, that he hadn't until now realized that someone was gently patting his back. Is everything better now? Reflected in his tear-encrusted eyes, he could see the person who had been patting his back. Even with his blurry vision, the image of the girl was quite vivid despite his blurry vision. She had beautiful silver hair and amethyst eyes. On her face was an expression of worry while she patted his back. Subaru let out a wheeze. Saba, Subaru. He twisted his body and shook off the pale hand that had been touching his back. As he did so, a trace of surprise flitted across the girl's eyes who had until then been patting him. But the one here whose soul had been more seriously damaged was him. His back. She had been touching his back. Now and before, someone had touched his back, and after that, agony, Subaru. He jumped back. In an attempt to escape her, he felt the hair on his back standing on end. However, his legs crumpled beneath him, and he fell flat on his backside. As he fell, his blow was softened by a rough, black presence underneath him. Subaru. Looking down, he saw the eyes of the reptilian creature staring back at him as he reacted in fright. Looking at its sharp, long fangs that lined up its mouth, he suddenly realized that they could easily be used as a weapon to chew him up. Subaru. Again, he screamed. He tried to escape forward this time. In front of his eyes now, he could see someone's leg. He didn't dare to look up and instead pushed away the small silhouette blocking his way. Beatrice. With a high-pitched shrill, her chiming silver bell voice frantically cried out something, but the meaning did not reach him as he covered his ears up. Immediately, he headed towards the gap which lay in between the foliage of the room. With his legs shaking, he leapt out of the room. Stepping into the stone passageway, and without stopping his body crashed into the stone wall. Stopped in his tracks, pain coursed through him. His sight was dyed red. In his mind he imagined an echo of his bones breaking. Subaru. His bumped right arm moved as normal. He pounded at the wall to check whether it really did move as normal. He felt pain again. He screamed again. Steadying himself against the wall, he broke out into a tottering run. Subaru. HFF, puff. Pant asterisk. He was out of breath, drooling from his mouth, with sweat dripping from his forehead. He continued running down the passageway as fast as he could. Behind, he felt as if someone was following him, and many times he resisted the urge to look behind him. If he had looked back and decided that someone was following him, it would have been too much to keep a check on his heart that felt like it was about to burst. He felt as if his heart is about to rupture, as if the blood within his body was rotting, and as if his body was about to shatter from its feet, like a glass sculpture. Whether it was a premonition or the truth, there is one thing that was clear, the absolute, unwavering fact that if this went on, he would die. People are born to be ruined. Every second you grow older, every second you head towards eventual death, every second you fall towards the end. Though he wasn't applying this metaphorical meaning of death to himself right now. Death was approaching him with a steady gait, cornering the unsightly, shameful him who was struggling to flee as if making sport of it. He ran away anyway. Death was following him. He would be killed. At this rate, he would be killed. Although he had already been killed, he was going to be killed again. Or given such sheer agony, could it be possible to not die from it? Was that a mystery of life? That's rather sickening. Embellishing it as mystery was rather disproportionate. It was a repulsive, unseemly attachment. Rather, shouldn't he be dead? Asterisk HK asterisk. The beating of his heart felt like an explosion that shook his eardrums. His sight was flickering on and off. Even how he breathed resembled how a baby would take its first breaths. It was completely absurd how he looked like when escaping from his fear of death. Yet, as comical as it is, there was no laughter. Everything to him was something that would cause him fear. Asterisk all around him. Almost to the point he was losing track of where he was running through. All of the stone passageways he had been going through looked the same to him. If there was one thing he understood, it was that he should not go back from where he came from. Though, if he continued to escape in this directionless fashion, he would gradually lose his way. If he lost his way, someone would catch him. If someone were to catch him, he would lose his life. Why his life? Such a question now was useless. He had no time to wonder whether to go towards the left or towards the right. Whilst escaping from death, which may catch up even at this very moment, he placed his right hand on the wall, relying on it, as he frantically panted for air, completely out of breath. It felt like he was drowning. It's as if he was struggling to break above the water's surface, even though here on the ground there is no water anywhere. Drowning, struggling as he drowns, heading towards the water's surface, kicking and struggling, kicking and struggling, kicking and struggling, floundering, before finally, "You, the hell you doing here so early in the morning, oi, Subaru?" He felt his feet stop as he sensed a monstrously huge presence right in front of his eyes. No, his feet weren't the only thing that had stopped. His breathing had stopped, his noisy heartbeat had stopped, and his knees, which had been trembling with fear and fatigue, had stopped. It felt like all of his vital signs had stopped, grasped by the scruff of the neck. Before his eyes, there stood a giant-like being, an illusion like that. But after a few seconds, he slowly began to understand that even though he was told there was no chance that the person upon the stage had the constitution that transcended what humans could have. At the same time, the fact remained that there was a human being who could clad himself in such a ferocious, demonic aura. A person all alone. You're just a lone small fry that's not even worth talking to. Small fry, so instead of person, should I go with critter? Even as a critter, you're not even worth considering. Go fetch those people you were with yesterday and that sexy girl. Are you listening? Hey, you or you? TL note. There's something that is hard to translate into English in this sentence. Read first refers to him by Chinese letter to say question if he's by himself, but then thinks better of it and puts Subaru down by using Chinese letter, the counter for person versus the counter for small animals. The figure that was standing still in front of him was rambling on. He showed the signs of being an extremely violent person, and his manner of speaking felt really vulgar, as if each word was being beaten into him. His breathing, which had stopped before, as well as his silenced heartbeat and his trembling knees, suddenly started up again. He had entered inside of the ferocious beast's cage, the very place where he mustn't tread. He had just kept running and running for his life. He had ran along the stone corridors and tried to keep away from any places he had found familiar. He had followed a stairway which he had found within a strange room which had led him upstairs. Maybe he had been told about the staircase yesterday, or was it something like yesterday, maybe some few hours ago? It was all but lost to the oblivion of his memory. He went up the long, incredibly long stairway, short of breath. Up he went, and then, when he reached the end, he had found himself being glared at by a most terrible beast. "Are you even listening to me? Subaru. HH. Suddenly, his breath was knocked out of him, and just before his eyes, he noticed he was looking right at the other person's face. He had long, red hair, with a black eye patch covering his left eye. He wore a kimono that exposed one of his shoulders and part of his chest. White linen cloths were wrapped around his exposed chest. Just underneath his nose, this man was jabbing at him a thin, wooden stick. Though the tip of it wasn't at all sharp, yet he still perceived what was thrusted before him as death too. Subaru. HK. Hey, don't you fucking ignore me. Subaru. Wah-ah-eh. Without hesitating, he had obeyed his instincts and had tried to escape him. But the moment he had tried to run back out of the room, he had crashed straight into the man's chest. The man had then pushed him down using his wooden stick, causing him to fall down. The back of his head bumped against the floor, bright flashes flew around his vision. Tears of pain started to flow out of his eyes. The pain of bumping against the floor, the pain of his head banging against the floor, it reminded him of the pain of being crushed. Subaru, Oi, come on, are you crying? Why'd you start crying? Did you fight with your boyfriend downstairs? Are you crying 'cause I talked you down? Subaru, Ghhh, Good grief, what a hopeless bastard, oi. Whilst lying flat on his back, tears had started to pour out of his eyes as he slowly relived the horror he had experienced. Looking at this spectacle, the long-haired man roughly scratched his head. He crouched down beside his head and, come on, tell me what happened. If you'd like to ask something, then I'm all ears. Subaru, ah. You ran all the way to this place. Must be a real big deal, you prick. He spoke those words with a sigh. The meaning of them was incomprehensible to him, and he simply reacted by blinking rapidly. Just then, he felt like the being who'd seemed vicious beyond compare slowly took on a more definite outline. Not only did it take on the shape of a person, but the emotions of a person in quintessence began to tie together an actual image. In his vision blurred by tears, the face of the man looking down in his direction gradually became clearer. No matter what you say, you're a fool. Subaru, Ghhh. With a cruel appearance, reminiscent of a bloodthirsty shark, the man had shoved the wooden stick right into his chest. He had slid in between his ribs the pointed end of the stick. He poked around and tickled the delicate internal organs behind his bones, as if he was making sport of it. Sheer agony pierced his entire body, making him feel like wanting to vomit up blood. The fuck you doin' running away, you prick? Even worse, what were you trying to pull if before you made a leg for it you came to me, you prick? I ain't your guardian nor your mate, you prick. Aren't you the one choosing who to flock with, you prick? Do you want to fucking die? Subaru, GH, Gar Ag, GGHHHI. I reckon we have the sort of relationship where we get along by talking to each other, you prick. If things would end up hunky-dory with that, then it's not like I'd have been called to this place from square one. Come at me like you feel like killing me. I'll play about with you. Finally, with evident irritation and hostility, the degree of his anger increased with every word he said. The hands of the man that was fiddling with his organs had a certain delicateness to them and boasted exceptional precision. He had been taught the importance and value of his organs with sharp, unbearable pain, so he well understood that. If the man had been someone who was on edge and had the tendency to let his emotions get the best of him, or if his arms had been something other than precise and gentle, his guts would have exploded a long time ago. That it hadn't ended up becoming like so was down to the man's awful talent. His overwhelming resourcefulness as one who oppressed, being extremely blessed with violence, along with the talent necessary to exert it. It was only thanks to that this act of barbarism was able to be carried out so properly. No, this place differed so much compared to the place he knew about. Beat its small fry. Subaru, GH. The poking sensation in his guts faded away and was quickly followed by the man's foot violently kicking his side. Rather than having kicked him with the side of his foot, he had punted him like as if he was a football. His body spins and tumbles around midair and emerged out of the large room he had been in. However, what was welcoming him as he was flying out of the room was Subaru. No where are. He was tumbling down the stairs. Seeing that scene in his mind, he instinctively dug his nails into the floor. With a terrible screeching noise, the nails of his right hand, belonging to his middle and ring fingers, were torn off their root. The nerves behind them became exposed, and red blood wet the floor, but somehow he managed to stop himself from falling down. Subaru, GH. GHHHHH. Immediately following the brief moment of relief, as he somehow escaped the fall, he was assaulted by a sensation of scorching heat at the base of his nails. When he looked at the hand with the sharp pain, he saw his fingernails torn off like the open lid of a box. The nail on his little finger was also coming loose as well. Seeing this pain spurred his brain into overdrive. Subaru, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts. Grasping his left hand with his right one, whose nails had been torn off, he applied pressure to ease the pain, even if a little. Coming in drops, the blood flowing from his wounds flowed down his wrists and left behind a trail of blood on the stairs as he stood himself up. There was no courage in him to look back behind him anymore. There was no sign that this ferocious beast was turning its attention over to him. If to say he had caught even a glimpse of it, he would have fallen down the stairs this time for sure, unable to put up with it. He had stopped himself from experiencing the worst situation, but had now settled into the second worst case. So, what was he going to do now? Subaru, WHY. Why was he in a place like this? He'd forgotten how to flee, his heartbeat engulfed by dread and paralyzed, and finally his mind had turned to the wonders and nonsense of why he was here. Though he should have been smashed up, he was here. Though he should have been engulfed by scorching heat and vanished, he was still here. It would have been nice if everything had been a dream or an illusion or the likes of that. Subaru, precognitive dreams. He had assumed that was what he had been experiencing. The spectacle he had seen, the people that he had talked to, the conversations that had proceeded exactly as he remembered them, the events that should have occurred, because they had seen them with his very own eyes. Thus he'd thought that he'd try and straighten out a theory as to why it had occurred in his own way. For sure, in some respects, he'd even thought about it with such vagueness, as if it were none of his business, as if it were no skin off his nose. He hadn't known that the way he would be rewarded for such impudence and shallow thinking would have been experiencing such intense pain. Subaru. Noticing that he had crouched down on the spot, he could see drops of blood dripping down from him and soaking the stone staircase beneath him with a hue of red. A feeling of wasted effort, a feeling of loss, a feeling of dismay, generally speaking. A lot of negative thoughts were spinning around his head. Even if he investigated the conclusions which were spinning around in his head, he would find that they would all result in the same thought. He didn't know why he had experienced such things. Subaru. Just a few hours ago, he was comfortably living his boring daily life. There was no danger there, at the worst. He was worrying about his future. There was no one around threatening him, nothing to actually be taken seriously. He had just been in a place where at most he only needed to face down at his mother and father's gaze. Was that so wrong, he wondered? He had continued to be an inconvenience to his mother and father. He had continued to disappoint them. He hadn't been a good son, and thus he had tasted the pain of death. Nevertheless, he had been driven to a situation now in which he hadn't died. The nails which had been peeled off were hurting him. He had been tortured by a strange man. He had been left all alone on this stairway. Was he crying? In retrospect, if he had thought about it, he would have done it more properly. Subaru. I should have at least said, see you later. It had been a life full of regret. Everything had gone wrong, resulting in only failure. If he thought back on it, the things he wanted to redo had once seemed impossible to have been done with his own hands and feet. For the first time it had occurred to him that, when I left home, I heard Mom's voice saying, take care, and I didn't reply to it. Why? Because I didn't wash the cups left in the kitchen sink. Subaru, GHFF, I didn't wash the cups. I didn't care to wash the brown stains that were stuck to them after drinking that hot cocoa. If I'd responded to Mom's voice, if I'd started a conversation with her, I might have been told to wash those cups. I ignored my mom's words because I didn't want to wash the cups. I didn't say anything. I left the house without saying anything and went to the convenience store and spent money that I did not earn. Then I noticed that I had ended up here. I didn't say anything to Mom or Dad. I didn't wash the cups, and then I ended up here. Without washing the cups, without even saying a word to my kind-hearted mother, I may die in this place. I will die having always caused trouble without giving anything back, without even washing some cups. I'll die. I will die. I will most definitely die. If I fall from that height, there'll be no saving me. I will definitely die. Subaru, I'll die. I'll die. Everything that lives eventually dies, and I am going to die here, alone in this place. Without my mother or father, surrounded by complete strangers, I'll end up becoming a filthy, bloody lump and die. Subaru, I'll die. I'll die. I'll die. Die, 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 he muttered this. As he muttered so, albeit strange, it felt like it became a little more distant. It was just a temporary peace of mind. He was distracted. When put into words, it's not like anything would dramatically change. Death would not change, loitering about while smiling so as to catch up with his fate. Just now, it appeared to be taking the shape of a person. A dark shadow rose up, laughing at him as if it were mocking him. That face which was stuck to the dark shadow was a face which seemed familiar. Whose face was it that he recognized in this place? Thinking this, he noticed. Death, with his face on it, was laughing as it pointed at him as he trembled. Subaru, don't laugh. He glared at the shadow and said this with a dark hatred. The shadow continued to smile. It hadn't stopped pointing its finger at him. Subaru, don't laugh. Don't laugh at me. This is no laughing matter. Standing up and grinding his teeth, he approached the shadow that was standing against the wall. The shadow still continued to smile. It still hadn't stopped pointing its finger at him. Subaru, quit laughing. I will die, but not to you. You will not kill me. The facial expression of the embodiment of death changed for the first time. It seemed like it had gotten angry that his own thing hadn't done as he'd said. It seemed like this was the shadow's weak point. It is here that he will launch an incessant onslaught against it. Subaru, I will not be killed by you. I will die. It's certain that I will die. I will die. I'm dead. I'm already dead. I died and came back here, but I won't be killed by you. In that moment he had tried to clearly speak those words out loud. Subaru. His lips had stopped moving to his will. The next thing he noticed was that his eyes, which had been glaring at the shadow, seemed frozen, and the sensation of being completely separated from his body. Why, even his ability to question it had been sealed. He had simply just succumbed to this sudden transformation in his body. He can't move. His body, no, it isn't his body that had stopped moving. It was the world around him. The black shadow that had stood in front of him had also stopped moving. Its distorted expression of anger remained frozen on its face. In this world where he couldn't move, there was only one thing that moved, and that was, I love you. It perhaps looked like a woman in black. Darkness. It was a woman with slender limbs whose whole body was entirely dyed in black. He doesn't know whether this woman's figure was made of darkness itself, or whether it was a woman that was dressed in black. He wasn't certain which one it was. It didn't seem to make any sense to choose one. In any case, it was a woman in black. It was as if she was wearing a black wedding dress, with a black veil that made it impossible to see both into it and out from it. This black veil completely concealed her face. I love you. However, the words which emerged from the lips of the woman who was shrouded in darkness contained an unimaginably strong emotion. Just how many emotions he could concentrate within to get close to the words that slipped out from her lips. In those words there was quality, there was quantity, there was the sensation of time past, there was weight, there was worth, and that was just the general concept. He doesn't know approximately how many people have uttered, I love you in the world. But if you were to take all of those, I love yous, and put them together, then it would surely be akin to this woman's, I love you. And slowly, the woman who had been gently whispering her words of love moved her black arm towards his chest. Slender fingers passed through his chest, his skin, his flesh, right through his bones and caressed his beating heart. Subaru. Several minutes, dozens of minutes, he doesn't know how much time had passed. His heart had been made aware of her presence ever since awakened, but in that moment he hadn't ever thought that he found her presence annoying. Because I love you. She had caressed his heart with the same passion that was found in her whispers. But suddenly, a great shock passed through him. His body, fearing pain, was completely succumbed by it. His body being crushed by his fall, his soul burning and being scorched out of existence. Even the pain of his guilty heart when he had thought back to his mother, all of those pains seemed insignificant compared to this pain. He wanted her to let him scream. If he could shout himself hoarse, he could alleviate the pain a little. Rather than be faced only with pain, he was able to escape some of the pain by thinking of things other than the pain he was in. Now he couldn't do that. He could only face his pain. I love you. Her love will not let go of his heart. It's like as if she had an everlasting desire to not allow him to turn his attention to things other than herself. It was as if she was envious of everything around him. Subaru. He had been suddenly set free. Subaru. Gasping, he collapsed on the spot. With tears overflowing from his eyes, he couldn't keep hold of his countenance. He feels a warm, wet feeling around his crotch, and urine starts to drip down the stairway. The dark shadow that had stopped continued to point at the shameful sight in front of it and was laughing loudly. As he watched the figure that was laughing, he realizes that he had been deceived. Since he had displayed behavior which had indicated weakness, he had been deceived into stepping on the tiger's tail that shouldn't be stepped on. Subaru. He couldn't continue his words. He was holding his head, completely at his wits' end. Blood was still flowing from his wounds where his fingernails had been ripped off. Even his tears and the urine that was dripping from him seemed like punishment for his weakness and stupidity. Just kill me. He voiced this out inside his head. As for having been killed, would he really be killed? He heard the sounds of footsteps going up the stairs and the sounds of anxious voices running up to where he was. Until then, he continued to cry like a foolish child, smeared in his own filth and disappointment. The ruins of Natsuki Subaru kept on crying. Arc 6, Chapter 40, Abandoned by the Stars. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray, Zero starting a life in a different world from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English-Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop, you Archbishop, proofread by Tournament, you Tournament 1122, fan art created by Source. Everything is messed up. Literally so messed up. He was found, brought back, and questioned about what had happened. Bit by bit, he found that the situation would get worse every time he would say something. All right, so Subaru really doesn't remember anything. As he was clutching his knees, the girl with the silver hair gazed down at him with a gloomy expression. Next to her stood a young, sweet little girl who couldn't come to grips with what he had said and reacted with shock. We were at a complete loss when we heard that we couldn't find you. By no means did I think the situation would end up like this. It looks like we're faced with a very difficult problem. The girl, who had a white fox scarf wrapped around her neck, grumbled this in a stiff tone. The knight with the handsome face nods and mutters the occasional, "Yeah, that's right," as she speaks. One. For how long are you going to be satisfied in exposing that unsightly appearance, Barusu? Scowling at him as she said it was the girl who had cleaned up the mess that had been caked on him. But there was no great animosity in her words, moreover. There seemed to be a forlorn expression hanging over her. Master, master, something in the air seems to have become remarkably more gloomy, tilde. You need to smile more. Ha, what is that? You stink of piss. The black-haired woman was laughing in good spirits without seemingly understanding the situation here. At the side of the black-haired woman, there stood a young girl who was stroking her braided hair. She gives him a sidelong glance which seemed to show barely a small glimpse of interest at the situation he was in. Subaru. All of these reactions, if he were to broadly speak about them, every single one of them he had let go by. Once, twice, thrice. He had disappointed them 3 times. However, this time, he had soiled himself after he had tried to escape from this place. He had been found alone, huddled up and crying. There was no room for doubt that it had been the worst situation so far. Even though he is the only one aware of the real facts behind this truly dreadful situation. Subaru, heh, it makes him laugh. The fact that he had repeated this same situation, no, not just repeated once, but 3 times. He had seen the same scene a second time. Then on the third time he had revisited this scene, he had finally grasped what sort of situation he was in. He had died twice. Both times, most likely, from falling from the same place. The first time he had lost consciousness on the way down, and because of that, he hadn't tasted the moment of death. However, it had not been like this the second time. As he fell down, he hadn't died quickly and had tumbled and crashed against the staircase, having his whole body destroyed. He then finally died, but came back. At the moment of death, he would return back to the green room, and once again he would wake up and redo the day. Die and return, return by death. That was the blessing which the god had given to Natsuki Subaru in this parallel world. Subaru, heh. For the second time, laughter had leaked out of him. Whether objectively one could call it laughter is left to discussion. Suffice to say that for Subaru it was laughter. There's nothing else he could do except laugh. He felt as if his tears have honestly dried up. Crying also wasted his physical strength. He had died and then returned. It seemed like the physical strength he exerts before dying is given back to him when he returns. This time, he had literally soiled away his strength on awakening. Anyways, let Subaru rest until things settle down. Over time, we may see some change. At hearing the girl with the silver hair's proposal, he knew that his treatment had already been decided like so. Was she thinking that he would lash out violently? Subaru's persona had been exaggerated. He had been brought back to the green room under everyone's supervision. I'm afraid we can't leave Rem here with this current Barusu. I oppose it. But apart from finding out what caused this, our best bet at helping Subaru recover would be to rely on the spirit of this room. If that's the case, we will move Rem to another room. Ram will stay with her and look after her. Ram seems to be the only one now who is worried about her. He wished he was in a place where there were no quarrels or clash of opinions. Whatever it is, he has no options. Taking the initiative and having the willpower to do things such as resolutely overcoming this situation, the current Subaru didn't have that within him. Poor Ram. She uttered this so Subaru could hear her, just before she carried the sleeping girl out of the room. It was remarkable how much they resembled each other. Like two peas in a pod, Subaru had no idea about the true meaning behind her words. Nor did he want to. Beatrice, Subaru, stay quietly here. Betty will surely find a way to return your memories, I suppose. Subaru. Beatrice, I won't let you cower here all alone. Just before she leaves the room, the young girl speaks those gentle words. Her voice is tinged with grief, yet there is also a hint of noble determination within it. The voice is strong and doesn't doubt what she says. In that way, in response to her voice showing that she is concerned for him, Subaru. Ah, Subaru shrunk back in an attempt to avoid her outstretched arms. Seeing his reaction to this, the eyes of the little girl swayed with hurt. Beatrice. They were strangers. No matter what, they were strangers. But for Subaru, they weren't strangers. For the girls, the Subaru here was a stranger. Their familiarity, their worry, and their deep affection was directed at the original Natsuki Subaru and not at his current ruins. And at the same time, Subaru, I have no reason to be killed. He had been left behind in the green room, alone. Subaru grinds his teeth as he mutters this. It's still not yet a good thing to turn towards those good feelings of comfort, or to blow off the barns that he had supposedly accumulated over time, and the trust and deep affection he has no memory of. However, why does he have to bear the consequences of the murderous intent that Natsuki Subaru had accumulated towards him? All the good things and the bad things, everything that was jumbled together was not his own. Despite this, why must he struggle and drown in this place? Subaru, I'm done with all of this. After a few hours of being alone, Subaru pushes his back up against the wall and steadily gets up. Having bitten down on his lips too much, he spat out the mixture of blood and saliva that had piled up within his mouth. Then slowly he starts to walk towards the green room's exit. TSS asterisk behind Subaru, the only presence that he could hear was the black lizard's cries. The cry sounded somewhat feeble, as if it was crying out in loneliness. Subaru shakes his head at that thought. It's just a big reptile feeling loneliness. Even for him, there was a limit to his stupidity. Subaru, somebody will bring you food. Shush now. The lizard continues to give out its feeble cry despite what Subaru had said. Without listening to it, Subaru shakes off his reluctant thoughts and steps out of the green room. He checks to his left and right, making sure the coast is clear, and starts to stealthily walk away. Subaru, water, and where they keep the food. He knows where those things are. As he had accompanied her to draw water, he knew where he could find it. He also knew where he could find food. The only other question he had was how much of it should he bring, Subaru. To be honest, there was something Subaru didn't know. What on earth had pushed Subaru down those stairs and robbed him of his life? However, there was something that Subaru clearly remembers. Back then, at that place, someone had pushed Subaru's back. It wasn't due to some ridiculous reason, such as being clapped on the shoulder from behind or being blown off by a strong gust of wind. He was certainly pushed. He had been on the receiving end of definite, murderous intent. Natsuki Subaru had been killed. The suspects were 7. Emilia, Beatrice, Ram, Anastasia, Julius, Meili, and Scholler. Subaru doesn't know how many of them are his friends, and how many of them are his foe. After all, Subaru now had no way to deem if all of them were truly his acquaintances. In reality, couldn't they all be assassins gathered here at this tower to kill Subaru? Subaru. If that's true, even if he brings out only a bit of food, he can't feel guilty about this. However, at the same time, the first and second time he had met them, Emilia had called out to him in the same manner, and Beatrice had told him that they would look for a way to return his memories, and Ram had cried out, refusing to believe that he had lost his memories. He doubts that they were acting. Subaru. It was impossible. Having gone through all that horrible stuff, he had been killed not just once, but twice. Subaru doubts the girl and the others from the bottom of his heart, and yet he couldn't run away just for his own safety. Subaru. Shit, half-assed son of a bitch. He swears at his own disgraceful behavior, unable to choose, as he starts to secretly pack away food. So to speak, he was collecting emergency rations. He was putting no consideration into what it would taste like. Of course, what was important now was that the food would fill him up. Other particulars like taste were secondary, no, tertiary. He had roughly taken enough food to last him 3 days. He had in a similar fashion drawn enough water and placed it in leather drinking pouches to carry along with him. Subaru, there's a desert outside, but he donned a cloak that had been stowed in the same place as the food. In terms of size and design, Subaru immediately noticed which one was his. The cloak is designed so when you clasp the front together it can be pulled up to cover his mouth. It seemed like a perfect countermeasure against breathing in the sand of the desert. And after collecting food, water, and tools to help him in the desert, his preparations were complete. Subaru, I guess it is past the time where I've twice died. If he thinks about it, the time he had spent huddled up in the green room should mean that he had perhaps already approached the time in which he had been pushed off last time. The effectiveness of return by death had immediately demonstrated its power. Like this, one by one, he could overcome his own death flags and continue walking the tightrope of life and death. Subaru. He doesn't want to do that. It would be better for him to not be in this place if he were to have to go through something like that. Subaru jumps out of the room and starts to jog. He heads towards where the spiral staircase is located using the mental map he had drawn in his head of the area. Twice he had been pushed down from this place. Naturally, his mind was screaming at him to get out of there. However, Subaru. Immediately after arriving at the spiral staircase and being momentarily enraptured by the scene in front of him, Subaru looked back behind him and carefully examined whether the assassin was hiding somewhere behind him. Luckily, because the time was different to last time, or because the assassin did not know where Subaru was, he couldn't find any trace of an arm stretched out preparing to push his back. About now, everyone was probably at the library where the memories of the dead sleep, or they had headed upstairs and are waiting to face that arrogant examiner. The memory of having his internal organs messed with by this man resurfaced, and a feeling of wanting to vomit wells up within him. Subaru, as if you can challenge a guy who's like that. He wasn't human, both in skill and personality. By no means at all does it seem likely to win against such an opponent were you to challenge him. If that's the case, what's it to him to overlook the fact that they had gone to face a fight they know they couldn't win? Subaru, hell if I know. Since a little while ago, this enigma had kept popping up in his mind and had been trying to stop his feet. So what? He doesn't care. Although she may have been gentle and kind, it may have all been a lie. She may have acted worried, but behind her back she may have been sharpening the blade of murderous intent. At least she could have warned him of the possibility that a dangerous individual was lurking somewhere in the tower. 3. Subaru. Well, what if the person they told me about an enemy? Enemy. Enemy was a word of ridicule. In his everyday life in his world, which was relatively unaffected by conflict, the opportunity to utter a word like enemy only existed within games. This world was one where you were forced to say that word, as if it were only natural. No, that is wrong. He doesn't want to be in this place. He doesn't want to stay here. Subaru. Subaru runs, biting down the unbearable irritation that was boiling within his chest. He runs down the spiral staircase, heading down towards the 5th floor that was out of sight. There are many steps spiraling endlessly down the wall, and he cannot see the end of them as he goes downstairs. He frantically ran down as fast as he could, puffing and panting, to the point that it almost seemed comical. Still, he didn't want to die. Subaru, I made it. He had made it down to the 5th floor. Unlike the 4th floor, the 5th floor wasn't divided into various rooms. Rather, it was like a single hall that occupied the entire space of the floor. The only thing that was noticeable within the 5th floor was a set of stairs that led downwards to the 6th floor and Subaru, a huge door. Looking up at the huge door, he sensed a terrible feeling of oppression emanating from where it stood. Subaru. Standing in front of the door, it felt like a strange, overpowering sensation was clogging Subaru's throat. He feels a slight sandy breeze blow through. Perhaps the wind outside was blowing some sand into the tower through gaps within the door. In the end, he was certain that this door connected to the outside. Subaru. If what Emilia and the others said was true using this door, he should be able to go to the desert outside. Desert, he had forgotten its official name, but nevertheless he will follow the sandy road and head towards civilization. That way at least, there should be no worries of having his life threatened by this cruel assassin. The basics to crossing a desert are to travel at night, avoid sandstorms, and try to move towards one set direction. This was the only knowledge he possessed on the matter. Subaru, I would bet that it is far more likely that I will survive there than in this place where it's certain that I am going to be killed. It could be said that this wasn't quite a normal decision to make. However, whether or not this was an abnormal decision to come to, he doesn't think making it is a mistake. Under these circumstances, if he can't believe even in himself, then only darkness would await him. He would never do such a thing like sitting in the dark, waiting for death. Since his death, he had decided to fight back. Subaru. He placed his hand on the huge door which was in front of him and slowly pushed it with all his strength. The door was more than 10 times larger than Subaru himself. By all rights, even if Subaru were to push with all his might, it should be that due to its weight, the door should not budge at all. However, when he had pressed the palm of his hand against the door, it had easily pushed open as if it was mechanized. Subaru, eh? Subaru let out a flat sigh and stops pushing the door open. Even if now they hadn't noticed Subaru trying to sneak away, if he left the door completely open, then he can expect the girl and the others to notice. Even if Subaru slips out and manages to get away, he wants to make sure to put in enough distance between them so they couldn't catch up to him. Subaru. Quietly, Subaru looked out from the gap in the door to the outside. As soon as his eyesight adjusted, he saw a vast sea of sand which was swallowed by the creeping darkness of nightfall. Subaru. It really is a desert, eh? He tries to squint his eyes so he can see what is beyond the horizon, but he can't see anything beyond it. In this environment, where there are no signs of any shelter, what is at the end of the horizon cannot be seen. There is no way for Subaru to know how far it stretched. However, no matter how far this desert went on for, it certainly couldn't go on forever. If he were to take a step forward, it would be one step closer to the outside world. If he were to get closer to the outside world, wouldn't that be a step closer to his original world? Subaru. For a moment, Subaru's legs remained glued in the tower. He will probably, surely, leave this place. It made him feel a bit guilty to do this, as he would be leaving behind those without any ill intentions towards him. Subaru shakes off these feelings. His attachment to go outside, to his original world, made him do so. He doesn't want to be here. Natsuki Subaru will return back home because that is where his mother and father await him. Subaru. So, with a firm step forward, Subaru passes through the gap he had opened in the door. Stepping on the sand, he notices that his feet sunk into the sand more than he had thought they would. Taking his initial steps with quite a lot of force, Natsuki Subaru had firmly stepped outside into the outside world. And Subaru, ha! A violent explosion from underneath his shoes suddenly launches Subaru high up into the air. He had been thrown from his back onto the ground, making him black out. He was in a complete state of panic. Subaru now no longer knew whether being in a state of panic was more normal than being in a state of normalcy. Subaru, what the hell happened? While spitting sand from his mouth, Subaru hadn't the leisure to continue those words. This was due to the imposing figure that was now standing right before his eyes, presenting an answer to what the hell happened. Subaru. Right in front of Subaru's eyes, a huge shadow is looking at him against the background which was dyed by the night. The shadow had a huge, limbless body with slimy skin. It looked ferocious, with cruel fangs lining its mouth. It seemed to look like an earthworm to Subaru. A terrible, gigantic earthworm. In length, it stood not less than 10 meters tall. It was an earthworm monster. Subaru, W. Was this a world full of monsters? Every single scene he had seen had been disconnected from reality and had not given Subaru's heart a chance to calm down. And now, the latest crisis was drawing near to him, not giving him any chance to crouch down and lament his fate. Subaru, this fucking HK, picking himself up, covered in sand, Subaru shakes his head. Most likely it had been this earthworm who had struck him earlier and blown him away because he was standing on its territory. That, or he had simply been standing in the place where it had emerged to take a breath. Either way, the earthworm had knocked Subaru down onto the sand, and moreover, Subaru. It's not going to leave me be. Understanding that in this situation he was at an overwhelming disadvantage, Subaru looked around his surroundings. He had barely taken 4 steps since leaving the tower. Although it was cowardly, there were plenty of options to pick from, such as jumping back into the building and living. However, as he looked around, Subaru cursed his luck. He had been blown away by the earthworm's blow and had rolled across the sand, away from the tower. The huge earthworm stood in between Subaru and the tower, so if he were to try and get back to the tower, he would have to go past the earthworm's huge body. Subaru. So, even if he were to run into the desert, he expects that the earthworm will eventually catch up with him. Firstly, this may not be the only earthworm. There's a decent chance that this earthworm is the lord of the desert with how big it is, although even one that's half of its size would be quite a threat too. Not to mention, if he were to be attacked by a herd of them, Subaru. In fact, was the option of escaping not even realistic. He hates the kindness which this world quickly teaches. And it seemed like the earthworm had decided what to do about Subaru, who had been busy trying to puzzle how to get out of this situation. Slowly, the earthworm turns its eyeless head towards him and opens its gaping maw. There was a curved horn on its head. It was quite a surreal sensation. Subaru. One shot. I just need to get in one shot on it. Just one shot, one shot, one shot. Pulling up his anti-sound cloak to his neck, Subaru keeps an eye out at what the earthworm was doing. He pulls his arm to the front and calculates the timing of when he should deliver his blow. He suddenly notices that the wound where his nails had been ripped off on his right hand had clotted, and that the nails had started to regenerate. Had it been healing magic, or the effects of the green room? And while he was distracted by that, Kruag, the gigantic beast had let out a terrible, shrill cry which he could have never imagined coming from such a thing. The earthworm had then leapt, almost as if it was flopping, towards Subaru. When Subaru had heard its roar against the howling of the wind, for a split second he had felt a strange sensation, like as if his body was acting on its own accord. Subaru. The earthworm had leapt at him, however he had rolled towards his right side and dodged its attack. He hadn't been thinking of anything else. It's as if he could see an illusion of himself of what to do next. He had simply followed what the illusion had done and moved his body like it did. And just like that, he had moved out of the earthworm's attack. 5 Subaru. She. A large amount of sand mushroomed up into the air, followed by a shockwave right beside him. Whilst experiencing the aftermath of its attack, Subaru rolls over the sand, still following the illusion of his own consciousness. Subaru. HHH. His body was far more agile than he remembered it to be. A split second after, Natsuki Subaru's year crossed through his mind was, which Subaru had no recollection of. There is a trace left of the experience Natsuki Subaru had accrued surviving in this harsh environment. Right now, he wasn't thinking anything about the fact he'd made full use of that. Subaru, at this rate, rolling forwards, with the nimbleness and vigor his precursor had left him, Subaru rights himself up and runs as fast as possible towards the tower's front door. In this moment, it is all about clinging onto what is in front of his eyes. If he makes it back to the tower, he knows that he will return to an environment of shadows and suspicion, as well as that he will be tormented by the fear of death. But still, he would rather chose that than ending up becoming this huge earthworm's poop. Subaru. He cannot afford to look back behind him, but it should be that the earthworm should not have enough dexterity to be able to switch over and catch up with him immediately. He was only a few meters away from where he was running to Subaru. RH. Just now, instead of the earthworm's head, the earthworm's tail had broken through and appeared from underneath the sand at Subaru's feet. The sand underneath him violently exploded, and the momentum from the tail striking his feet hoists Subaru's body up into the air again. Subaru. Whilst revolving around in midair and flailing his limbs about, Subaru sees what is underneath him. Beneath his eyes, he sees that the earthworm was opening its large mouth, preparing itself to greedily devour his body. He'd underestimated it. He was naive to think that he could outsmart the wild animal that had lived in this harsh environment and gotten so huge, just like as if it had been living in a greenhouse similar to his world. Reckless, he had been reckless. He will pay the price of his own impudence with his life. Subaru, no. Whilst falling, he shouts this out, like a trapped insect struggling to escape a spider's web. 6. Die. Would he died again? If he dies, he doesn't know if he will even remain dead. If he is to die and it end here, what would happen? Could he bear it? If he were to be thrown forever into the never-ending darkness like this, could he bear it? Subaru, Nuo. He screams and stretches his hand out to the night sky for help. There is nothing to reach out to. Even at the ends of the sky, which was blurred behind some wispy clouds, he couldn't see the stars that were supposed to be there. Subaru was falling alone. He had been abandoned by the star with his own name, about to be swallowed into the monster's belly, to blink out and disappear. Such despair. Suddenly, a surge of white light appears. Subaru. A surge of white light rushes forward and blows away the face of the earthworm that had opened its large mouth. Literally, the impact had pierced the earthworm's face, with its large head being warped in such a fashion that it almost looked like it had been turned into Aimzeku. 7. And then, in a split second, it blows up. Chunks of dirty flesh and blood spray out of the earthworm's head as it flies off. The head that should have been swallowing Subaru is gone, and the earthworm's huge body shakes violently. However, before its body toppled over, Subaru's own body crashed off the top of the headless worm. With a heavy shaking movement, it had felt like as if he had fell onto a hamburger patty just before it was going to be cooked. Its gaping wound, its internal organs, and its flesh and blood were the things that had cushioned Subaru's body. He had been given his life in exchange for the discomfort stuck in his hair. He coughs and splutters violently. He realizes that inside his mouth there is some foul liquid within it which is making him want to vomit. Meanwhile, the earthworm's remains were slowly starting to topple over. Wait, no. One after the other, the light flashes across his field of view, and every time it does, the earthworm's remains are shot through. It's shot through, burst open, segments of it are sliced off, bits of it fly about. The earthworm is cut into ribbons. It was only by coincidence that none of these flashes of light hit Subaru, which you could say was a stroke of luck in such a bad situation. However, eventually, our Subaru notices that its body, which had been shook by these impacts, had now been strewn across the sand. Subaru was now lying with his back on the sand, his whole body stretched out. Subaru. Up above him, he sees the same starless sky just like when he had been flung up by the earthworm. By some twist of fate, even now that he had managed to cling onto his life, the sky hadn't changed. Subaru had still been abandoned. 8. Being amazed, being wanted, being abandoned, being hated, being befriended, being kept away. Does he want to live? Does he want to die? Does he want to be here or not? Subaru, what should I do? If you know, tell me. There is no one around. Covering his face, he shouts this out at the empty sky. He received no reply. Who was it that Subaru wanted to hear the answers from the most? It was probably Subaru. Answer me, Natsuki Subaru. Saying this in a miserable voice, Subaru sighs and turns his body to the side. There had been no particular reason why he had happened to turn his body, but that tiny movement had barely saved Subaru's life from the white light which had grazed his ear and struck the ground next to him. DZZZZZ asterisk. Something had grazed past his right ear with tremendous force. He clasps his hand to the ear which was throbbing in pain and rolls to the side. As the blood was dripping out from his ear, he saw what had caused the pain. A long, narrow, glowing object, reminiscent of a stinger, was stuck in the ground. Subaru, what is this? As soon as he had reached out to touch it, the white stinger had turned into dust. And right after that, Subaru's field of view shook. Subaru. It shook greatly from top to bottom. Whether it was because of an earthworm wriggling, or whether it was because the last stinger had stabbed into it, the ground underneath Subaru's buttocks was collapsing. He was sinking down along with the surrounding earth. Subaru, you are... His fingers slip through the sand as he falls, trying to find anything to hold on to. Rather like an insect falling into an anthill, Subaru's body sinks to the bottom of the sandy floor, unable to do anything about it. His arms and legs are buried. He cannot move them. Turning his head up, he desperately gasps for air. His whole body was being swallowed by the sand. He frantically tries to fight against the premonition that he was about to be buried alive. Subaru, someone help me. He couldn't say what he wanted to say next. Subaru's entire body was being swallowed by the sand, sinking. and the stars do not even take one single notice at the miserable, struggling Subaru. 9. 1. Really, I was translating this term. https://n. Wikipedia. org/wiki/izuchi 2. This line is said by Ram. If it's not clear, I was using. Because in Subaru's minds they seemed nebulous, as he was referring to them via description than by name, which he knows. Since they start to use names in speech from herein, I will add names to the dialogue. 3. Though no specific gender seems to be used in the JP source, I think these lines are referring to Emilia rather than everyone at once, hence the use of she. His next line of speech seems to reinforce that. 5. I think, from my take on this line, it's a highly metaphoric way of describing things. I think the author's saying that Subaru's thought process blanked out for a sec, and he subconsciously envisioned what to do to avoid the worm. And instinctively he had moved out of its path as if he was following a ghostly illusion. 6. The metaphor used here is different, but I think I understood the gist of it and replaced it with an English equivalent. 7. Nam Nam, https://n. Wikipedia. org/wiki/aimzeku8. He is not referring to Natsuki Subaru here. His name is written in kanji, so he is referring to himself by the constellation Chinese letter, https://n. Wikipedia. org/wiki/hairy-head. Ironically enough, I just realized Subaru's constellation refers to Pleiades. Make that as you will. 9. Again, not to be confused with Natsuki Subaru. It's referring to the constellation again. He is calling himself by his star name. It's saying that the stars above, which I presume were hidden by wisps of cloud, which is why he couldn't see them earlier, did not even care about the sinking Subaru, i.e., as if he was a sinking star. Very cool metaphorical writing. I bet it has some significance to the tales of the Pleiades as well. Arc 6, Chapter 41, The Scent of Peace. All rights belong to TAPPEI Nagatsuki, the original author of Ray, Zero Starting a Life in a Different World from Zero. This is a translation of the free Japanese web novel into English Japanese web novel source. Translated by Archbishop. Archbishop fan art created by source. His consciousness returns. The first thing he feels is a difficulty in his breathing. Subaru, cough, cough. Hack feeling something unpleasant collected in his mouth. He coughs violently, spitting out sand and forcing open his heavy eyelids. He had lost consciousness. He feels sand trapped within his eyelashes. While fighting against that, Subaru wonders what had happened and tries to recall what had occurred to him just before. If he remembers correctly, there had been a terrible confusion, and after that he had attempted to leave the tower. There was no doubt that he had managed to leave the tower without being disturbed by anyone. But Subaru, the earthworm, the white flash of light, recalling the terrifying incident that had happened just after that, and recalling how the impacts had continued to rain down, one after the other, Subaru seemed quite suspicious whether he was actually alive. Had it only been down to luck that he had survived all of these abnormal events that he had been dragged into? However, even if he were to die, it was doubtful that he'd truly remain dead, though that was how the current Natsuki Subaru was, an unwanted foreign being. Subaru. After the stingers, I fell right into the termite nest. He remembers that the ground beneath him had collapsed, and he, along with the earthworm's gigantic carcass, had been swallowed by the earth. He had managed to stretch out his head to secure some oxygen. However, even his head had been swallowed up by the sand, and he had faded out of consciousness. It seemed as if he should have died of suffocation, but that hadn't been the case. Subaru, this place, is this underground area beneath the desert. Looking around, he couldn't find a source of light in this room. The darkness was so thick that he could barely see anything nearby. Opening his heavy eyelids, he takes the palm of his hand out of the sand and pushes it forwards in front of him. Only barely can he see that it's there. The world around him was too vague to let him see the existence of this lifeline. It really seems as if he just barely remains in the world of the living. Subaru. This ain't appealing, damn idiot. Thinking that much, Subaru tries to slowly move his arms and legs in an attempt to release his body, which was trapped in the sand, from the heavy pressure around him. The feeling that he couldn't breathe was due to the bed of sand that had swallowed him from his waist down. He was quite lucky that his upper body hadn't been buried. You could say that this process of extraction could be likened to trying to raise up a flag on a sand dune without causing the flag to fall over. Subaru carefully extracted himself out from the sand, moving it away, making sure not to make any poor movements to avoid burying himself in the sand again. Subaru. After barely escaping from the sand, he felt a great sense of fatigue overpower him. It was likely because his body temperature had been sapped by the cold sand, along with the continuous pressure it had exerted on him. The fact that he couldn't grasp how long he had been out cold was horrible. Subaru, guess I was lucky that when I was out cold another earthworm didn't come and munch on me. While speaking, Subaru becomes aware that his throat is parched, and he moves his hand to his waist. When he had escaped from the tower, he had fastened some leather pouches containing enough water to cross the desert there. But his fingers, which had been trying to grab that water, closed around thin air. Despite fumbling around several times for them, he couldn't find the leather pouches. Subaru, I should have expected this, considering I was buried from my waist down. It seemed like the water pouches had come off when he had been swallowed by the sand. As well as that, it looked like the bags filled with his emergency rations had also come away. Although it indicated he was in a fatal situation, he remained calm at heart. Already, his heart had been paralyzed by this cruel situation. It was perhaps becoming absurd to react every single time like this. Subaru, at least it's gotta be nearby, eh? Getting on his knees, he fumbles around the bank of the sand mound that he had just gotten out of. It is quite a large amount of sand. He didn't expect to find it, but as if it was just mere consolation, he feels something soft exactly where his body had slipped out of. Confirming it with his fingers, he was surprised to find that it was the leather pouch that he had been looking for. But Subaru, it's empty, so why am I even surprised by this again? Feeling the pouch with his hands and gauging its weight, he realizes the contents are empty. Just in case, he places the opening of the leather pouch to his lips, but only a few drops trickle onto the tip of his tongue. Even if it was just a little bit of water, now every drop of it was precious. He was thirsty for more. Subaru places the leather pouch to his waist and decides that he will feel around his surroundings again. Subaru, if he had found his drinking pouch, there could also be a chance that he'd find his food. But such an expectation had been betrayed, just like when he had found his water. His food had fallen out and was now scattered all around the mound of sand he had been buried in, almost as if it had messily eaten it up. Subaru. Due to it being dark, he can't see around the sand bed properly. However, he can recognize that the food that he had brought now lies scattered around it. The crumbling pieces left on top of his palm have not maintained their original shape. If he were to speak truthfully, he recognizes that the food is now inedible and leaves it scattered there. Gulping, Subaru's throat ached in thirst. Subaru's food was scattered around his surroundings. This fact clawed at Subaru's mind as if it was scratching him with nails as he desperately tried to remain calm. Subaru starts to sweat profusely, wasting precious water, as fear fills his heart as he thinks of being preyed on by earthworms. Originally, this huge earthworm had crawled out of here, so to speak this was the monster's habitat. The earthworm who must have been the chief among them had died, but it would be no surprise to him if there were other monsters inhabiting this passageway which it had cohabited with. Subaru, I need to leave this place as soon as possible. However, he knows that he can't see his surroundings well. He starts to crawl using his hands and knees, relying on feeling his way using the ground beneath him, never mind even the walls. He could merely flee crawling on his hands and knees, making sure to check for ground, walls, a path, his own being. Subaru. Ow, it hurts. Shit. Ouch. His right ear had been grazed by the white stinger. The fingernails on his right hand were still halfway through regenerating, and the organs in his body were still aching him. While suffering from all this pain, Subaru was crawling out, trying to escape this place. Even if beforehand he didn't know exactly what the heck he was running away from now, he must do anything to get away from this strange being. Anyway, in order to get away from this unfamiliar being which inspired such fear in him now, he had no choice but to continue his escape. Subaru. Smelling something, Subaru moves his hands and feet forward towards it, as if he was being guided by it. The smell gradually became stronger, eventually becoming strong enough to be regarded as a reliable sense. It guides Subaru deeper within. It had been a little over an hour since Subaru had begun to crawl out of this place. Whilst escaping, Subaru had accidentally slid down the sandbed quite a few times and had also been obstructed by walls in his way on this trackless path. Sometimes, sand had rained down from above which had caused him to react by rolling over in fright. Whilst doing that, Subaru realizes that he's within a cave underneath the desert. Although it hadn't really been any great salvation that he had noticed this, it did bode an omen to its real meaning. A strange, yet alluring scent suddenly drifted into his nostrils. By no means could he call such a strange thing sweet-smelling. In a typical situation, smells are generally considered to be of lower priority and have less value when trying to figure out a situation. However, considering that his sight was sealed by darkness, and he couldn't tell what was happening in the world around him, this sudden stench felt extremely fresh to him. Therefore, Subaru started to crawl using the wall to feel his way towards the source of the scent. It looked just like when a young child first starts to learn how to walk using walls. Sniffing with his nose, he looked exactly like a dog who was following a trail towards the depths of the cave. No, to the depths, or maybe the entrance of the cave. He cannot be sure where this scent is leading him to. Subaru, pant, pant, asterisk, pant. Without even noticing, Subaru had stuck his tongue out and had started to pant heavily, exactly like a dog would. He had heard that dogs would stick their tongues out and pant in an attempt to cool their body down, but Subaru didn't really equate this comparison to his current gesture. The reason why Subaru had lolled his tongue out, imitating something that a dog would do, was because he wanted to increase the amount of knowledge he could obtain from his surroundings by sensing the flow of the air on his tongue. Subaru. In just a few hours, Subaru had applied the methods that creatures use to move about in the dark. Naturally, his half-baked attempt was completely different to how it occurs in reality. The darkness was unchanging and didn't provide Subaru with any hints of what was around him. In this lonely area, all he can hear is his own breathing and the faint scratching noises of himself paddling across the sand. But this felt comfortable to Subaru now. It was terrifying, it was horrible, but one way or another he must manage it. It was the first time he had naturally embraced this natural human feeling. Right now, Subaru loved this silence and this darkness and this lonely space where no one was around. Right here, no one would hurt him. Right here, all he needed to do was keep floundering around to try and escape. Right here, even if he needn't think about anything, there were things to do. A feeling of complacency, similar to the feeling you would get if you let a muddy river sweep you along, embraces Subaru's heart. If he could just melt away into it, that'd be no problem, wouldn't it? In this manner, he had submerged himself in thought about it whilst escaping from his fatigue and habit. Subaru, damn it, what is this? Subaru had steadily crawled through the dark cave. On his way, he had come across a fork in the road with a path going left and the other one right. He anxiously deliberated on which path to choose. In the end, he decided on the right path. From then on, there was a long, long journey whereby he followed the scent. Would there be a place where he could find relief at the end? Would he reach somewhere which had light? Even though such a prospect was not necessarily true, Subaru pushed forward without any concern for this. However, Subaru, there's a dead end right here. The path that he had followed had steadily narrowed. After going up a slope, Subaru had found a narrow path awaiting him which could only be traversed by literally crawling. At the end of it was a wall of sand. Ultimately, it was also where the source of the scent ended. Subaru, why did I even come all the way here? No, wait a sec. Angry at the blockage in his path, Subaru had been about to strike the wall of sand, but caught himself. He racked his brains at the current contradiction in front of him, having followed the scent all the way here. Subaru had unmistakably arrived here by following the scent which was lingering in the air. The scent had been wafted in by a draft and had certainly arrived all the way to Subaru, who had been quite far below. In other words, if the drafts had flowed from here, it meant that this wall of sand could not be a dead end. The draft had surely flowed into the cave from the outside. Subaru, if that's so. Frantically palming his surroundings, Subaru shuffles back a bit. He fumbles around the dead-end path for anything. He hadn't missed anything on the left, right, front, or bottom. Then where had he not looked? He had been abandoned by the stars. Had he been afraid to look up? Subaru. There it is. After more than an hour of backtracking, his hand that had been touching the ceiling brushes against the air and Subaru's eyes sparkled. Standing up, he puts his arms up, and even when he puts his shoulders up, they don't hit the ceiling. There is a hole. The hole is more than twice as large as Subaru's waist, and his body would fit through it easily. In other words, if he were to push up using his back and legs, he should be able to climb out. Subaru. A gentle breeze was flowing into the hole. Until now, Subaru had clung on only to the target that he had been pursuing, that is, the scent. It was flowing in from the wind above to the underground area below that he was in. There was no choice now but to climb up as Subaru had sniffed to make sure of it. Subaru, GHH, NHHH, FFFFF. Placing his body by the hole, he pushes his back against the wall. Of course, because the wall was made up of sand, if he makes even a slight mistake in the angle in which he applies his body weight, he risks the wall collapsing and his plan failing. Being careful not to do just that, he places his feet against the wall too. Subaru thrusts his feet and buttocks up and slowly starts to climb out of the hole. Subaru. Fortunately for him, the wall has some grooves embedded within it in some places, which to an extent help Subaru support himself as he makes his solitary climb. Perhaps, if you happen to be a person possessing superhuman physical ability, you could simply put your feet on one of the grooves and get out of the hole just by jumping. Subaru, puff asterisk. But Subaru does not possess such physical abilities, thus he has no choice but to continue steadily climbing up. Still, it seemed like his body had been trained in the time which was unknown to him and was suited to withstand activities like this. He gradually adapts to his body having a new engine, just like as if he was getting used to driving a new car. He'd gotten the hang of it by the time he had managed to pull half of himself out of the hole and had established that he was a pretty good climber. However, before being able to show the full extent of his strength, Subaru. I'm out. He doesn't know roughly how many meters he had climbed up the wall, but if he were to take a look, he had climbed up to such a height that if he were to fall down, he would die from the resulting fall. Finally, Subaru had succeeded in climbing up the wall. Subaru. He didn't feel any great emotion about it as he thought he would have. That wasn't down to him thinking anything tedious like, when you go and do it, this is how it is. Climbing all the way up the wall was a piece of cake when faced with this. That's all he thought. Pulling himself out of the hole, treading onto the fresh sand, Subaru stands up. And taken aback, he mutters a brief word about the majestic structure that was standing in front of him. Subaru. A door. Right there in front of him, there was only a strange door standing there without relying on anything else for support. Subaru was at loss at what to do about the door that was standing right in front of him. Subaru. I can see it. It seemed that the hole Subaru had gone through did not lead towards the surface. He was most likely still inside the cave. If there were different tiers to the cave, then the place he had probably dropped down to was B2F, and now he was at B1F. Rather than it being a large-scale area, the room was hidden by the means of something that you could call a stopgap. The room had nothing that resembled walls or floors. It only had a single door which was standing there stark still. Could there be anyone at all who could fathom what this meant? Subaru. Other than me, that is. Whilst looking at the door, Subaru announces this with extreme arrogance. Placing his hand on his chest and widening his eyes, he was clearly aware of what the door he had suddenly encountered was. It was his door. He had a strange confidence about it. He was confident that this door was his own. The draft that had flowed to the underground area he had been in, the scent that had been carried in by the breeze, he had followed it all the way here. Everything was bringing Natsuki Subaru to this place. And now, the door that stood in front of his eyes was glowing. Even in the darkness, it was asserting its presence. It was longing for the moment when Natsuki Subaru's hand would open it. Subaru. Subaru walks up to the door with a spring in his step, as if he was about to go and caress something beloved, like a sweetheart. It looked like a set of wooden double doors that were about twice as high as Subaru. Straining his eyes, he can see that at the center of the double doors there was a doorknob that allowed it to be opened. Can also see a strange pattern in that particular area. He can see 7 jewels there. Subaru. Wah! Whilst looking at the jewels, Subaru touched the door, and just as he did, the jewels on the door started to shine, 4 of them. 4 of the 7 jewels were shining brightly, welcoming Natsuki Subaru's visit. The door's master did not admit the visit of those who didn't possess the keys. TL note. Unclear if keys is plural or not. Based off context, it likely is plural. In the wink of an eye after he blinked, Subaru did not know where he was. Subaru, wah. Breathing a sigh like as if he was stunned, Subaru looks down at his hands. He can see, of course. There was light here, there was color. He can see where he is standing. He is standing on a stone floor, there's stone on the floor. Subaru. TCH Subaru's body stiffens as he looks around his surroundings in confusion. In his surroundings, there are reddish-brown walls, walls. They were the walls of the circular tower. The huge door behind him leads to the outside. He was inside the tower. He was on the 5th floor of the Pleiades watchtower. He had come back to the very place that he had tried to leave with determination. Subaru, theirs. No way. He can't continue. His words never come out. It must have happened just after he had blinked. In a split second, Subaru had ended up standing stark still in this place. He cannot break out of his shock. He feels dizzy, and his feet start to wobble. He was barefoot. His shoes had come off. Subaru grinded his teeth together. It isn't the case that he is completely stunned by this place. He could run away right now, no. Subaru, why should I run away? Subaru looked up above him with extreme fury. Murky feelings were boiling up inside him. A burning hate like molten magma was zealously whirling inside Subaru without him even being aware of it. His time alone had ended. The peaceful darkness had ended. Clinging to that scent had ended. His hatred was one without rhyme or reason towards the fact that everything he'd had there had been wrenched away from him. Subaru. Why does Subaru have to run away? Someone plans to kill him and had once, no twice, taken his life. Why would he want to be in place where they shamelessly masquerade as good people, hiding that fact under a guise of tranquility? There are only suspects inside this tower. Does he want the culprit to be inside? Did he escape because he couldn't do it? He had been an idiot. He had been an idiot. He had been an idiot. He didn't know anything. If whichever one of the suspects was the right one, then he could just crush them all until he found the right one. Subaru. Luckily, all of those bastards were careless around Subaru. He would find out whether it was only the culprit that would show caution around Subaru, though the culprit has no way of knowing that he is suspected by Subaru. That is the advantage Subaru has here, having once died. Once he had realized that he had died, he knew that someone was trying to kill him. The only thing he has to do is kill them before they commit that act of murder again. Subaru, ha! A wicked smile appears on his face, and Subaru covers his mouth with his hand, stifling his laughter. The idea for his gratification had just suddenly leapt out from inside his head. Subaru had received a blessing from the heavens to pick up and rescue himself. Subaru. Then he needed some sort of weapon to set things straight swiftly. Subaru rushes down the spiral staircase. He was going down towards the 6th floor below him. The 6th floor was fuzzy in his memory, but he recalls that it is the lowermost floor of this tower. When Subaru and the others know, when the original Natsuki Subaru and the others had come to the tower, they had borrowed on the strength of lizards to cross the desert, using things that looked rather like horse-drawn carriages. Of course, if there are such things lying about, they may come in useful for an emergency. Subaru. Subaru had arrived at the lowermost floor and found the carriage he was looking for, however his feet had stopped there. The reason that he had reacted like that was because just beside the carriage, collapsed, there was a huge lizard, already dead. Its head was missing. Its body from the neck down was lying on the floor. Had the blow that had decapitated it been that powerful, the head that had been blown off was nowhere to be seen nearby. Instead, blood had flowed out of its huge body, staining the ground below. He found that a considerable amount of time had passed since this tragedy had occurred, since the blood had dried already. Subaru. The stingers. What Subaru had thought about in this moment was that it looked a lot like how the mysterious white stingers had blown up the head of the earthworm, which had battled against him immediately after he had left the tower. This impression was consistent with the remains of the lizard that had collapsed here. Then that attack was from someone inside the tower. It was highly likely that it was one of the suspects' attacks. Thus, the lizards themselves had been treated just like cattle in their pitiful lack of burial too, Subaru. Does this mean they are not trying to hide their true colors anymore? It seemed like his opponent had been quick-tempered and rather than giving Subaru a chance to escape, they had instead delivered a decisive blow. Whilst trembling at this fact, Subaru went inside an intact carriage. It showed signs that it had been used as a place to sleep. Tearing through the inside, Subaru finds a big knife inside one of the baggage. Dare he say it had some purpose? Was it something similar to a survival knife? Rather than it being an all-out weapon, the large knife was probably good for cutting through obstacles. But in this situation, it would still be a splendid weapon that would fulfill Subaru's aims. Subaru, I don't know who the enemy is, but he will show them. With his body burning with dark feelings, Natsuki Subaru heads upstairs, knife in hand. A twisted smile curves across his cheeks, boosted by his hatred. If he wants to be saved, if he wants to escape, he must believe that anything he murders is justified. With that, he will go forward. Below his smiling cheeks, he doesn't notice the tears of fear that are streaming down his face.